Welcome to Track 1, Law as Code, here at the ENDORSE conference going on all this week until Friday afternoon. Now, I'm glad you've chosen this track. We have many great speakers to get through. You're going to hear from several speakers. I want to urge you once again to use the chat function to ask questions of them. We'll try and select as many as we can if we have enough time. First of all, without any further ado, let me hand over to John Dann from the Central Legislative Service of the Ministry of State in Luxembourg. John, you're going to tell us about ELI and ELI-DL standards towards interoperability and smart reuse of the descriptions of legislations and legislative activities in the European Union and anywhere else. It's quite a mouthful. I hope you can say it in more brief terms than me. So the floor is yours, John. Oh, we can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
Yep. Yes, I was saying I liked especially the two last words, anywhere else. So I think we're really open, even if it's called European legislation identifier, we are really open to all the world. The idea actually started a couple of years ago when we were discussing the access to legislation. Access was, for most of us, quite hard actually to find the legislation in the different official journals. And even further, we were thinking about how can we easily digitalize the public service, meaning also legislation. So this was really getting quite complicated. And if you put on top of this that you would like to interconnect or exchange information, it was at a given time was actually almost impossible. Now, coming up with the semantic web over the time now, there were some ideas coming up, and so we really looked into it to see how can we increase, well, not only transparency, efficiency, promote the also participation of the public to legislation, and of course, I think most important also, try to, as I said before, to interconnect this information and provide data. I think we've been speaking a lot about data now, all this since yesterday. Provide data to companies, to startups, and this maybe can try to do something with it, something differently. They have other ideas. They have maybe programs, apps they could use with legislation. So this was one of the ideas. And of course, to create this semantic web and to create this legal knowledge graph, actually, so to be able to exchange information, you need interoperability. You need building blocks where you can either put together on top of each other, and you can really have, well, I think in this case, it must be common, but very flexible. Don't forget, we are here in Europe, many official journals publishing, so in different languages. So the framework must be very flexible, so we can really build on top of that, and everybody could actually adopt it. So this was one of the main challenges over time to see how can we build this this framework, this standard, so everybody could actually build on top of it. One of the main issues also was, of course, human, and I think this is very important nowadays, machine-readable information. So really try to create a knowledge graph, and here not only for published legislation, but that's ELI-DL, it's also from the draft legislation on. So the work started in European Official Journal, it's European Forum, where all the European and beyond come together. And the conclusions came up pretty fast, actually, in 2012, got extended in 2017. And we have now quite a lot of implementers now throughout Europe who have the standard implemented in their various pillars. Here also, I would like, first of all, to thank all those countries who have adopted ELI, have implemented it, and we will see one very nice use case just after my presentation. And also a great thanks to the Commission and for the financing of the project, which have been impossible actually to really go on with all the ideas we had, and also to the Office of Publication with their help over the time. Just coming back to how we function. So it's really a task force. It's countries who adopt it, who implement it, are members of the task force, and it's really a collaborative work of all. And I think that's one of the nice projects we have seen, being all together, reinventing here the legal world has worked over time. And again, thanks for all those who have contributed and of course have implemented. But what is ELI? ELI, well, for a semantic web, you need, of course, 3 pillars. It's one, you need the first a URI, identifier precisely where is the legislation. If I take an analogy with a cellar wine, you would like to know where is your specific bottle and which shelf it is. That would be the URI. Defining the shared data model, I will call it metadata here. So coming back to the wine cellar would be the label on the bottle, describing which year it is, what brand it is, etc. And the third pillar, which is in this case very interesting, is really trying to exchange the information you have in computer readable, so a computer could understand it and could also share the information. So in this case, I could make a quick query and find my bottle exactly where it is, and maybe ask the search engine to go get it, or a robot to go get it. So we really could use a chatbot here to try to find my bottle in one shelf. So basically, we're really trying to define uniquely the legislation so it can be found, described, and shared with metadata. The ELI-DL, it's going a step beyond or before publication. So before publication, of course, it goes through Parliament, it has to be signed, it gets amended, it has successive versions, etc. So you really have to try to modelize the activities. So here we're not only speaking about metadata like date of publication, it's enforced, not enforced, really speaking about activities. We also can trigger some other activities if something happens. So here we're really going on beyond publication, and I think this is also very interesting for other parliaments. We have already parliaments who have been looking at it, adopting it, and I think this could be very interesting. If I come back to my wine cellar, in this case, well, it will be ELI-DL would actually describe who harvests the grapes, who transported the grapes, to where does it come from exactly. So it's really the process of before publication. Another project we have been working now is, of course, I think here we come again to access to legislation. Most of us use search engines to search for something. In this case, will be Google, for example, searching for a directive. I think most of the people go directly to the search engine and try to find the legislation. So why not provide them with richer information? Why do not extend the schema.org with legislation extension, which did not exist before? So the search engine can have richer results. In this case, we could say, for example, the directive is enforced, is not enforced. There is a consolidated version. Do you want to look at this one? Be careful, it has been amended, it has been changed, etc. So we really can provide more information to the people who do not use directly an official journal, search engine, but the Google-like or Yahoo-like search engines. And this has also been proposed. It has been already been implemented by a couple of countries. Luxembourg, for example, I know Brazil Parliament has done it. In Spain also, there is one of the regions who have also implemented. And all this is also based on ELI. This is just some information, so you can really go visit and look for precise information. And so all documentation is there. It's pretty well documented. And also, we can also provide some help if you want to implement it. So just 1 or 2 slides more, will be actually 2. So what's coming on in the next couple months? So we have thought about a centralized search engine, but the search engine will actually go and try to take the information automatically, the ELI information from those who have implemented it. So you could actually provide a cross-national search functionality. So it's really not, it's only based on ELI information. There will be no stockage or archiving of documents. It's really the ELI information coming in. Based on that, of course, would be very interesting. I think that's the part for the politicians or for management. We can also provide some dashboards, and you can see how legislation has been transposed throughout Europe or how things are modeling. So we're really currently working on those visualizations and statistics, I think, which could be actually very important to see throughout Europe or beyond how this has been going on. I've been very fast through this presentation, so I think I'm up to you now. And many thanks for having me on this board today.
Thank you very much, John. That was indeed great timekeeping on your behalf and really setting out our section that we have here, because we're going to hear about the ELI use case from Spain next. We're also going to hear from the European Parliament and also from Finland. So we're getting our sources across Europe covered today. But with that, thank you very much. We're going to go on to this, as I mentioned, use case in Spain with Susana Gomez, who is from BOE, the state official journal. Susana, do we have you there? Are you ready to? No, we have we a glitch, gentlemen?
Hi, Susana. Can you switch on your camera and your microphone?
Well, let me remind you then, while we're waiting for our technical glitches to be ironed out, that of course ENDORSE is the first time we're doing this European Data Conference on reference data and semantics. It's organised by the European Publications Office of the European Union, and we're running it all day this week, indeed every afternoon. But of course there will be recordings of the different sessions available for you to view afterwards. And I would also like to say we want to get even more feedback from you, and you can do that via Slido. If you go there at the moment, we have a poll open that will allow you to say what you think are best practices and give information that will be fed into future events. So I think, Susana, we have you there now. Great, fantastic. And it allowed me to give people a little bit more information about what we're doing going forward. But with that, I'm going to hand you over to your 15-minute presentation.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting us to present the Spanish experience regarding ELI and show you why ELI is a powerful standard to improve interoperability, not only at the European level, but at the national level too. Nevertheless, some features of the Spanish legal system make ELI implementation more difficult than in other member states. Let's look at some slides. Spain is one of the most decentralized states in Europe. The Constitution, passed in 1978, recognizes the right to autonomy or self-government of nationalities and regions. The territory is divided into 17 autonomous communities, plus 2 autonomous cities, and as a result of the distribution of powers, state and regional acts and regulations are deeply related and interlinked. In fact, the most important powers affecting general economy, health, education, or environment are concurrent and shared. This is why, if you wish to know the legislation ruling a subject, you need to access both the state and the autonomic legislation, and even sometimes, depending on the matter, you need also local regulations. According to the constitutionally recognized autonomy, there are different official gazettes. The state official gazette is the BOE. Besides, there are 17 autonomic official gazettes. And finally, local regulations enter into force once they have been published in the corresponding provincial official gazette. Although all these official journals are published in authentic electronic edition, according to a law passed in 2007, they don't have any kind of shared or common pattern and are managed independently. As a consequence of the multiplicity of legal information systems, each authority has its own legal information system and runs it independently. The technological situation of legal information systems is not homogeneous. They have been created along the time. They follow different models, so there are not uniform or compatible metadata. There are not relations or interlinks either among the state and the autonomic legal information systems, even if it is quite common that official databases offer legal resources issued by other territorial levels. Another interesting feature of the Spanish legal system is the multilingual context. Spanish is the official language, but the Constitution recognizes also for other languages as co-official in some autonomous communities. Basque, Catalan, Galician, and Valencian. So, in such a multi-level structure, interoperability becomes a key factor to improve citizens' right to access to legislation. This is the reason why, when we decided to implement ELI, we thought that it was better to have a global strategy and to take into account not only the state level legislation, but the regional and local legislation also. I think that this comprehensive scope is the main differential aspect of the Spanish legal implementation model. We started by creating a specific governance structure to coordinate the ELI project at the national level. For this purpose, the National Commission for E-Government that gathers the state, the autonomous communities, plus the Federation of Local Bodies, decided in 2017 to create a specific dedicated working group for ELI. This working group is formed by representatives of the state and the other official publishers of legal information. It is a multidisciplinary team formed by IT specialists, lawyers, and documentalists. Our task was to find an ELI solution that could fit all the territorial levels. The result of the work done by the working group has been agreed in the form of a technical specification. This is a kind of standard document that put together the minimum guidelines based on ELI to guarantee the interoperability among all the Spanish legal information systems, state, autonomic, and local. Due to the forced global perspective, we have distinguished two phases in the implementation. The first stage refers to the state and the autonomous communities, since these entities have quite well developed legal information systems. This phase has an homogeneous and symmetric scope, and the goal is to implement the first, the second, and even the third pillar as soon as possible. This phase started in 2018. The second phase refers to local regulations. In Spain, there are 50 provinces and more than 8,000 municipalities. Local government is characterized by its wide variety in terms of size, economic activity, and geographic location. In contrast with the first stage, this local stage is asymmetric. We are still working on the design, but the purpose for local regulations is just to offer an implementation model. This way, those local bodies that want to implement ELI could do it in a harmonized and coordinated way with the state and autonomous communities. Even for those that cannot deal with ELI at present, the specification gives them the opportunity to improve its systems and make future developments and make sure they will be able to interoperate with the rest. We can move now to analyze what has been the result of all this process. I'm not going to detail the technical solutions we have adopted, but really the drafting of the technical specification was not easy due to the complexity of the legal Spanish system. We had to find an ELI solution that could work with legislation that is issued by different territorial levels, published in different official journals, available in different languages, and disseminated by a plurality of different legal information systems. We had, to find that solution, we had the full support of the European ELI Task Force and its chairman. I'm only to highlight some of the key aspects. First of all, we have used the same URI template for all legislation, regardless the territorial level. The second relevant aspect is the control vocabulary, because we have to share the values for each of the URI components. And finally, we have defined a minimum set of common metadata, something like an interoperability core selected among the different properties of the ELI ontology. Of course, each entity is free to apply the other ELI metadata according to its need and situation. We can now move to analyze the result of the process. We have not created a unique Spanish ELI HTTP address. Instead, each legal information system has its own ELI HTTP address. Nevertheless, we can now interoperate because we share the same set of ELI common metadata and the same authority tables to identify and describe legislation. And as a consequence of this evolution, referencing and linking are much easier, so citizens can browse from one legal system to the resources of the others. For instance, we have a double publication system for the main autonomic legislation. So acts passed by the autonomic parliament enter into force once they are published in the autonomic official gazette, but they have to be published again in the state official gazette. Now we can link both publications with the ELI properties. ELI has another publication and its inverse, ELI is another publication. And we can link easily initial and consolidated versions when they are available in different information systems with the ELI properties, ELI consolidates and ELI consolidated by. Moreover, we really can start to think about new services that give access to legislation issued by different territorial levels, as for instance, the development of meta search engines. I would like to make a brief reference to the implementation in process. The state and 5 autonomous communities have already implemented ELI, and the rest are working on the developments they need to complete the process. We have a very interesting experience reusing ELI URIs and LEOs, the tool designed by the EU for drafting. This tool in Spain has been adapted by the state and it is now on testing phase. One of its features is to give drafters easy and quick access to previous legislation and the possibility to import the text from the state official gazette databases, including consolidated text. This valuable feature is built on ELI URIs. Finally, I invite you to visit our common webpage, elidata.es. Here you can find all the information about the project, technical resources, and follow the update. You can access to the complete content in English. I hope this Spanish experience could be helpful for other countries that wish to implement ELI and have legal decentralized systems. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Susanna. I'm glad you were able to give us that outline of your experience and what's happening in Spain. Let's have a look, see if we have any questions. I see ones coming in at the moment, and I will remind our audience that you can use that chat function to send questions to our speakers. I just urge you to get them in time. So we've got one here for Susanna. In what format are their controlled vocabularies structured?
We have not pay a lot of attention to that matter. We want to improve the way we offer it now in our Common Web ELI page. And as I said before, you can check it in this web page. But I think that we, in the near future, we are going to improve the way it is available in order to make it more reusable.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that concise answer, and thank you once again for sharing your experience. We're going to move on with this block with Enrico Francesconi from the European Parliament, who's going to tell us about legal knowledge representation and reasoning in a linked open data framework. So, Enrico, are you there and can you hear me?
Yes, Jennifer, I can hear you very well.
I can see and hear you.
Thank you very much, and thank you a lot for your introduction. Thanks also to the organizer for the invitation to this conference. I'm going to share my my screen. I hope that you can see it. Okay, thanks a lot. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about a legal knowledge representation and a reasoning approach in a linked open data framework. So let's have a look firstly to a first scenario to focus our attention on the matter that we are going to discuss. Let's consider a user that wants to subscribe an online contract. He might be willing to know more about the consumer protection law, but maybe he could be probably not interested in knowing everything about the document, but probably he might be interested more in a specific aspect of this document, in particular in specific norms like consumers' rights, like for example the right of withdrawal, the supplier duties towards the consumer, which actually are implicit rights of the consumer himself, or the procedure to fulfill the consumer's duties and the sanction in case of not compliance. Now, currently, there's no search engine, even advanced, that is able to respond to this kind of user information needs. So what we actually would need is a legal information system, a legal information retrieval system endowed with a reasoning facilities, able to retrieve not just the document, but in particular to focus the attention on specific rules. So let's consider a second scenario. Let's consider you have a meter for detecting speed limits, and you want to compare these limits with the speed limits regulation. And so you could be interested, especially if you are on the web, to know to check the driver's compliance with regulation about traffic speed. And checking such compliance in presence of conflicting rules or rules changing over time, which is a kind of the so-called norm divisibility. So also in this case, it would be interested to know a system that is able to work over the web, which is able to detect compliance checking in terms of legal rules. And this system should be endowed with reasoning facilities. So basically, in these two scenarios, we have addressed two different kinds of services that can be distributed over the web. The first one is advanced legal information retrieval, and the second one is a system able to detect compliance checking with respect to legal rules. So now in this presentation, we are going to present an approach in the semantic web, and in particular in the linked open data, that is able to transform regulation or legislation into code so that you can implement advanced services for the final users. The approach that we are going to present is based on the distinction between provisions and norms. Basically, a provision is a textual object, is a set of signs organized in words and sentences for creating normative statement. On the other hand, a norm is considered as the meaning or the application of such normative statement. And in this respect, it's a more conceptual object. Now, these two concepts are two different ways of looking at pieces of information written in a legislative text. In particular, if you aim to reason with textual information, you actually talk about provisions because they are textual objects and they can be used to provide advanced legal information retrieval, like endowed with reasoning facilities, for example, able to implement the Offeldian reasoning, which is something that I'm going to talk later with an example, or addressing the legal drafting activity. If you want, on the other hand, to reason with to make arguments with, let's say, with the interpretation or application of legal rules, you are actually talk about norms, which are conceptual objects, and this object can be used for legal compliance checking. Let's have a look at the first, how to address the first scenario. So modeling provisions for semantic annotation of legal text in order to implement advanced legal information retrieval services. Let's consider, for example, this excerpt of EU directive. In particular, this is an excerpt of a consumer protection law. If you look at this text according to a formal profile, this text is actually made of a paragraph. But if you look at those paragraphs in terms of semantics, they can be considered as a set of provisions. For example, the first one contains a duty of the supplier towards the consumer. The second, the procedure of the supplier to fulfill a specific obligation with respect to the consumer. And then another right for the consumer to the supplier, and a duty for the member states towards the consumer. Now, in order to have this, let's say, explicit annotation of the semantics of pieces of information or the paragraph in the legal text, we have developed a model which is called provision model, which is basically a taxonomy of classes of rules. They are constitutive rules or regulative rules, including, for example, deontic concept like obligation, permission, prohibition, and so on, or rules on rules, which basically are amendments. Now, using this model, you are able to semantically annotate the piece of information contained in a legal text. And, for example, to implement specific facilities like an information retrieval system that is able to implement what I called before the Offeldian reasoning. Basically, we could provide a query to the system asking for give me my rights if I am a consumer, and I want to retrieve back not only the, let's say, the rights that are explicitly written in the text, but also the duties where the consumer is a counterpart because they are actually rights of the consumer. Now, this kind of reasoning can be another example, let's say, of this examples of advanced information retrieval are the retrieval of technical relations. For example, retrieving back the duties of the supplier and the procedure to fulfill a specific obligation. In order to implement such an approach, we have represented provision types and attributes using the provision model, expressing axioms on provision types and attributes, and in particular using tools like RDF schema, ELI-DL, so description logic standards, and inferences by ELI-DL reasoners and Sparkle as query language. An example of a type of axiom that we have implemented in the model is the one that is shown in this slide. Basically, we have extended the classes of right and duties in terms of implicit and explicit rights, or implicit and explicit duties, and establishing an equivalence relation between implicit right and explicit duty, and implicit duty and explicit right. So we are able to actually this way to implement advanced information retrieval system implementing Opheldian reasoning like the one that I showed before. Let's consider an example of the second scenario where we want to address the problem of legal compliance checking. So in our approach, we have modeled norms by domain ontologies, and in particular by restrictions on properties of this ontology for legal compliance checking. Let's have a look at these two examples. The first rule is basically more qualitative rule, the second more quantitative one. The supplier shall communicate to the consumer all the contractual terms and conditions, or according to a whatsoever country law, one cannot drive over 90 kilometers per hour. So both rules are speech or acts. So you can look at them as provisions, so as textual objects. But if you consider the application of R1 or R2 on specific facts, we are actually talking about norms. Now, a possibility, or what we have done in order to represent, let's say, this scenario, and in particular the obligation contained in R1, is to design a sketch of a domain ontology where we have a supplier which can freely communicate conditions to the consumers. No, he cannot. But in order to select those suppliers who are compliant with the rule, we actually have introduced a restriction on the has communicated condition property, which basically includes a value true on this property, so that this restriction is able to identify suppliers that are compliant to the rule itself. The second examples is one related to the speed limit regulation. So according to a country law, one cannot drive over 90 kilometers per hour. We can describe the scenario where a driver can have can drive at whatever speed, but in order to be with the regulation, he has to have on the has driving speed a value of a speed value between 0 and 90 kilometers per hour. So we have basically represented the obligation as a sort of constraint on this property, so able to identify a class of drivers who are compliant to the regulation. What we have to note is that the driver R2 compliant is actually a class which is inferred by the reasoner. So, for example, here we have 4 drivers. 3 of them are compliant to the D1, D2, and D3, which are compliant to the with respect to the regulation, and D4 having a driving speed over 90 kilometers per hour, which is not compliant. Let's consider now the problem of handling normability. So the fact that, for example, a norm can change over time, and maybe one individual can be, let's say, compliant with respect to a law which is a previous version of a law and not more compliant with the next version. So let's consider the previous examples like this one, and let's consider now that you have a change in the regulation, which tells you that the people who are not compliant with the regulation are those that have a driving speed over 80 kilometers per hour. So without changing anything to the model, now the individual D3, which was compliant to the regulation with the regulation before in the previous version of the rule, he is no more compliant, and in fact he has now an individual of the class driver and no more on the class driver R2 compliant. So what we have shown basically in this presentation is a framework for transforming the law as code in terms of actionable rules in the linked open data cloud. What is important to underline is that the approach has been conceived in a decidable framework, basically in a description logic framework. Basically, you can use reasoners that are already available on the market. It is based on the distinction between provisions and norms, and moreover, we have shown that this approach is able to handle defeasible reasoning, so norm defeasibility, as we have shown before in the previous examples. And that's all for my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Enrico. Just squeezing in there under the time. And we'll just take one very quick question, which is, does the European Parliament have a special focus or interest in the legal knowledge representation?
Yes, in fact, the European Parliament is currently working on the new version of the European Parliament Open Data Portal, and one of the focus is to represent legal documents according to an ontology which is able to represent, let's say, them not only in terms of a structure, but also in terms of metadata and bibliographic metadata, first of all, but also more advanced metadata like legal-oriented ones that we have shown here.
Thank you, Enrico. That was great. That was very concise. And thank you to our audience for your questions. Remember, keep asking them with our speakers using the chat function. Now, our next speaker from the Finnish Tax Administration is Mikael Hällström, who is going to talk to us about enabling semantic interoperability in legal drafting. Mikael, over to you. Mikael, we can see you, and we can see you're great. We can see your screen now as well. Fantastic. However, you're on mute. This is my now for the event.
Yeah, now I should be unmuted. Is that correct?
Yes, you're great.
Okay, thank you. And switching to the presentation version. Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to have a presentation about our legal editor and semantic interoperability project in Finland. As stated, I'm Mikael Hällström, coming from the Finnish Tax Administration, but been working with the semantic interoperability issues for a number of years on the governmental level in Finland. So the semantic interoperability is something that is really familiar to me, and it's something that is we're trying to introduce on a governmental level in Finland between different organizations. But the approach to add some semantic interoperability into legal texts, that's something quite new, and this is really a theme that is just coming up in the late years. The context of this short presentation is that I have to use some seconds to present the background. First of all, the inspiration for the whole project actually comes from New Zealand. Maybe it's familiar to you, the better rules, better government concept, including the rules as code concept also. I'll introduce that shortly, and the parts that we have looked into from the New Zealandic approach. Then something about the background and foundation, that we are building something on some existent infrastructure already, the Finnish national EIF implementation. We have an interoperability method and platform up and running. And then shortly, a development of the legal editor as a project, adding on the features of this interoperability platform. And some words maybe about the future development if I have time, but I'll show you some examples also how we are trying to develop our tools at the moment. So I'll just use all the, okay. As an introduction first, the adoption of the better rules concept, I won't go into details about the New Zealandic approach, but it's really interesting, and they try to develop a way of creating legislation in a more digital friendly way, even enabling what they call machine consumable legislation, that legal text could be maybe written as code that could be used by systems directly. The part in this New Zealandic concept that we started to look into a couple of years ago was the part of enhancing semantic interoperability in the legal drafting. That as you can see in the picture here showing the New Zealandic total approach, there should be early on a concept model of the concepts that will be introduced in the legal texts, and they should then, if possible, refer to some kind of global ontology, or in our view, at least a national ontology, defining concepts for all governmental sectors. And then also really important here that once you've decided on the concept model and the concepts and the relationship between the concepts, that you actually stick to the definitions, and you can also link from the legal text directly to the original concept model or the terminology. So that's what we have been looking into from the New Zealandic approach. Now, some words about the actual interoperability method and platform. This is something that is up and running since a couple of years ago in Finland, part of the development of our approach of the European interoperability framework on the semantical level. So what we have introduced is a tool set, and I'll briefly explain. This is the architectural model for the tool set, consisting of a number of tools that help us modeling the metadata for different contexts. So let's start by the concepts that we first define in terminologies. And that means that we have a tool for creating SCOS ontologies, both on a governmental level or then in different domains. And these can then be referred to through linked data technologies in different data models, or should we say vocabularies actually. So we have different models for different domains, and then we have an overarching national model also, or like kind of like a Finnish core component library or Finnish core vocabulary. And what is also important here to see is that we actually can link to equivalent artifacts in international reference data models. So if we find some international standard that we want to link to directly from each class or each property or each concept, then it's possible to do that also. And how are these data models, which are, well, you could think of them as Lego bricks that are then supposed to be reused and extended in specific models that define the contents of, for instance, an organization's database or the API for a service. These are we use the application profiles that we reuse and specialize the data model contents, the core vocabularies in these application profiles. What's furthermore interesting here is that we have a possibility also to publish the models not only as graphical models or textual models or HTML. There are also a number of technical variants for the publishing of these application profiles. So they can be published as RDF or JSON schema or even open API definitions. And finally, of course, there has to be a governance model for this all. So there's a governance model steering group and things like that at the Ministry of Finance that is looking into how to divide the work for the definition of the different domain models. So this is something that is up and running, and we have tried to use that then in our project with the legal editor or law editor. And the law editor is simply actually an XML editor for legal drafting. Based on XML structure that is a bit simplified from the actual XML structure used by the Finnish Parliament. So we have an editor now up and running, a beta version where you can draft legal texts and search terms because it's linked to the interoperability platform. So you can find terms in concepts in different terminologies and then link to them according to the linked data principles. And then you can also, if you don't happen to find something that you want to use, especially in your legislation, your legislative piece, you can suggest new concepts to the terminologies. And then also up and coming, we're trying to develop also the possibility then to show the data components that are actually then linked to these terminology concepts. And I'll just show you a couple of examples of this shortly. So the actual legal editor development project took place last year from January to October. And what we managed to create was actually an up and running beta version of a tool for the drafting of these structured legislative bills. So an XML editor based on a simplified structure. And we also have the possibility then of linking terms in these governmental bills drafts to concepts which are published in the terminologies on this interoperability platform. So everything there is up and running and can be used, and it's actually something that is open source. So if anyone is interested, you could actually ask for an instance. What we also looked into was, of course, how to make this operational at some point. So we have been working together with some ministries and the Prime Minister's office and also the Finnish Parliament to check whether we can be the law editor or the legal editor can be a seamless part of the law drafting process. And that should be possible because we have a possibility to integrate ourselves into the government level case management system also. And finally, what we still need is the linking of terms or concepts to these classes and attributes in the published national core vocabularies. That's something we just managed to touch upon. We didn't manage to finish during this project. So here are some screenshots. There's a mixture of language here. I created one short piece of legislation, a start of it in English. But all the terminologies found, all the terms or concepts found in the terminologies were then in Finnish. So the linkage here is from English to Finnish, but I'll explain to you. So if I write a piece of legislation about something, and in the first paragraph I write about a person, then I can search for this person concept, and if I find a suitable person concept in the terminologies, I can link to the person concept here, and it will be listed to the right here. It says käsitteet, meaning concepts in Finnish. And in this way, I can add all the important terms that I want to should be unambiguous, that should be that I want to define exactly, or has been defined exactly in a domain-specific ontology or domain-specific terminology in this way. So the linkage is there, and then in the next step, if I want to show that this concept is then linked to an existing data vocabulary data model, there's a possibility then to link on the interoperability platform from the person terminology concept to the person class. And then the other terms, for instance, gender and occupation, are already there as properties or attributes to the person class. And building, the term building in the legal text then was referring in this case to the building class in a certain core vocabulary from the built environment. And yes, actually, I have one last slide here for the recap of the whole concept. So I'll walk you through how these things actually work together. So we have the interoperability platform up and running, where we have the tools, the terminologies, where you can produce these cross terminologies. and then link to the data vocabularies or data models that are to be used then as basis for the application profiles. So they are like the core vocabularies or the core components, and then we have reference data code lists also that rely on the terminology concepts. And these all work together. They can be used as linked data. And then the semantic legal editor or law editor, whatever you want to call it, is then just a tool utilizing these artifacts that we write texts, XML texts, according to a simplified XML schema, and then link to terminology terms in the actual legal text. And the link prevails all through the legal drafting process, all the way actually through Parliament also. On the interoperability platform, there are then data components that are or libraries that are developed, classes and attributes that refer to the terms defined in the terminologies. And in this way, we can identify, as I showed you, that from the legal drafts with the texts where I link to person or building or whatever term, we can find the right data components or the libraries to be used when modeling the actual data model for the law. And the actual data model for the law or the legal framework, the whole of legislation that needs to be modeled can be modeled in this way as an application profile. And the toolset, the interoperability platform, allows us actually at the moment then to directly, just by pushing a button, to create or publish this as an open API description, which means that the technical developer can use it directly in his or her API documentation tools, Swagger or anything else. So in this way, we have a semantic link all the way from the legal editor through over the terminologies and the data components, libraries, application profile, and the open API description to the API and the data source itself. And what is still left here to develop actually is the fact that we are looking also into the things described in the New Zealandic and Australian approach regarding the rules as code. So how could these legal drafts be developed from human readable texts more into machine consumable versions? So that's something we are going to look into this year actually in a specific project. Okay, that was my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mikael. I was trying to get your attention there because we have a few questions coming in from you and we're really short of time now. So the first question is your XML schema based on an existing standard?
The XML schema is not based on existing standard because the Finnish national schema used by the Finnish Parliament and the ministries is in-house developed many years ago. So we have looked into equivalent also and things like that, but it's not used on a governmental level.
Okay, and another quick one. Do you plan to map the Finlex themes with Eurovec
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Do you plan to map the Finlex themes with the Eurovec thesaurus?
That would be a question to the Ministry of Justice, who is recently is going to develop the Finlex, the Finnish legal online source. Yes, if they're going to do that, that's a question I'm afraid I can't answer.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad we had time to get to at least a couple of our audience questions there. And thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you indeed to all the speakers of this last block of presentations. And thank you for your questions. I want to remind the audience that you can go to Slido to fill out a poll. It's not the Q&A section, it's the poll section where we have a survey for you. We want to get the feedback on best practices and examples and so on. So please do, if you've got a chance, fill that in. Maybe grab a coffee and have a think about the answers. Also, do keep tweeting using the ENDORSE 2021 hashtag. And we will have, in our later blocks, more questions as well as a roundtable panel. So we do want you to keep using the chat function for those all-important questions. Now we're having a slight change of pace. We have two presentations coming up now, which are a little bit different, a bit more like you might see in a normal conference. Were we all in the same room? I wish we were. So first of all, let me turn over to Elena Montiel and Patricia Martin Chozas from the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, who are going to tell us about an ecosystem of smart cloud systems to manage compliance across jurisdictions and languages.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Great. Then can we start sharing our presentation? Just a second. It's on its way. So I'll start by saying, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure, it's our pleasure to welcome you to this presentation of the Link project in the framework of this ENDORSE conference. It's been a pleasure so far to attend. I think we have had a great presentation so far, so congratulations to the organizers. My name is Elena Montiel. I'm the coordinator of this action, and together with my colleague Patricia Martin, we will give you a summary of the main objectives and achievements of this Lynx project. Next slide, please. Yes, so here are some basic data about the project. Yes, Lynx is an innovation action funded by the European Union under the H 2020 Framework Program. And the topic, Big Data PPP, Public-Private Partnership, Cross-Sectorial and Cross-Lingual Data Integration and Experimentation, as you can see on the slide, which means that this project is also part of the projects under the umbrella of the Big Data Value Association. Its initial duration was 36 months, has been extended due to the COVID pandemic, and we are about to finish the project. So now 40 months, finishing at the end of March. There you can also see estimated project cost and contribution by the EU. Yes, thank you. Okay, so Patricia and I are presenting on behalf of the Lynx Consortium, a team of excellent researchers, developers, scientists, men and women coming from different institutions that I will detail in the next slide. This is a pre-pandemic photo of the Lynx Consortium in the mountains of Madrid during one of our developers meeting. And in this slide, you can see our partners, the partners in the Lynx project. Most institutions are located in Europe, and one of our partners is an Israeli company, K Dictionaries, a dictionary data provider. Then we have 3 Spanish universities in the consortium, Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, which we represent here, coordinators of the project, and then University of Zaragoza and the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Also from Barcelona is the next partner in the consortium, the international law firm Quatre Casas. Then from the Netherlands, we have in the team the industrial certification company DMVGL. Next is DFKI, the German Research Center on Artificial Intelligence in Germany. From Latvia, the language technology company Tilde, specialized in machine translation. 2 partners from Austria, Cybly, a legal tech company, and Semantic Web Company, a provider of semantic technologies. And last but not least, Alpenite, an Italian system integrator company. So there you see 11 partners on the whole that make up the Lynx consortium. So what have we tried to achieve in this project? Well, our main objective was to contribute to reduce the difficulties that companies and also law firms face when immersed in internationalization processes, especially in Europe, right? In which legislation and regulations are involved. And they face problems due to the fact that institutions in the different countries in Europe publish their documents and data sources in different formats according to different criteria and obviously in different languages. So we have devoted our efforts to create an ecosystem of smart cloud services based on a LKG, our legal knowledge graph, which integrates and links heterogeneous compliance data sources, including legislation and case law, standards, and private documents, across jurisdictions and languages. So here again, we see that, well, link data and the power that link data gives to create such a graph of legal knowledge is also central in this project. Okay, in order to showcase all of this, we have orchestrated the different services into 3 pilots that you see on the screen. The first one is related to contract analysis. This pilot faces the challenge of companies dealing with contract-related information spread, distributed in different formats and locations. So how have we solved this? Well, by harvesting documents in different formats, PDFs, docs, emails, and demonstrating how annotations help the user to find select the most relevant documents by arranging them, thanks to those annotations, in multiple dimensions. Yeah, and improving in this way the discoverability of documents. Yeah, that is basically the discoverability of documents. Yeah. Okay, the goal of the second pilot, the so-called labor law pilot, was to provide a solution for a fragmented landscape of sources, legislation and regulations, again, in multiple languages in the labor domain in Europe, right? So thinking here of internationalization processes in which European companies can get involved in. So here again, our purpose was to demonstrate, or has been to demonstrate, how to help the user to find information in a more relevant, more efficient way. So basically, we have focused on search and question and answering services, yes, to be able to answer a legal question. And as for the third pilot, the one called geothermal energy compliance, here we aimed at demonstrating how a comprehensive legal taxonomies can help the user find and select relevant regulatory documents. So here, basically, we rely on semantic similarity between the user's document and the documents we have collected to recommend the most appropriate documents. Yeah. Also improving or contributing, to accessibility and discoverability of data. So if you are interested in any of these pilots and I would like to see a demo, you can access our Lynx Project EU website. There is a tab there devoted to a webinar series we have organized and that just finished in February. Okay, so after this, let's say, brief introduction of the main objectives of the project, main contributions, and a general description of the business cases, we would like to provide more details on 2 main contributions that we think may be of interest to ENDORSE participants and attendees. And these are, on the one hand, the legal knowledge graph that I have already mentioned, and on the other, the Lynx services platform that we have created. In the slide that is being shown, we refer to the legal knowledge graph. So the Lynx project revolves around providing homogeneous access to documents from different sources that are not homogeneously identified, described, structured, and annotated. I think, yeah, this is a problem that we have heard already in the several presentations that have preceded this one, right? The problem of this homogeneous access that is so needed. So documents coming from different domains, in this case, legislation, case law, standards, industry best practices, from different jurisdictions in different languages and in different formats. So we have also heard a lot about the European Legislation Identifier, ELI. So as you know, this is used to identify and describe legislations. So laws are identified with URIs and described with metadata elements, well arranged in the ELI ontology. But it is mainly used for EU legislation and legislation in some member states, but other official law publishers may use other systems to identify and describe their documents. Yeah, so law plays a major role in Lynx, of course, but acts are not the only type of document to be attacked. And in this sense, ELI may not be sufficient to cover other types of documents. As for content in our legal knowledge graph, content is structured in different manners, XML, JSON, RDF, and using different formats, yes, by different legislation publishers. Some use, the MetaLex standard, others a common TOZO, or derive, such as legal docml or the future common TOZO EU. However, they may not cover every legislation, and obviously they do not cover other types of documents. Yeah, so this was another issue. And finally, there are different standards for annotating text documents, but not in JSON LD. So in the next slide, we summarize the features of what we call a Lynx document, which is the main element in our legal knowledge graph. So in this, the idea was to create one single data structure across jurisdictions and domains. Yes, we also provide a data model, which is well formalized with the legal knowledge graph ontology, which is open. Data in this legal knowledge graph is in RDF to fully exploit the benefits of the semantic web and in order to grant interoperability with other resources and systems. And consistent data structures that can be validated with RDF shapes are also provided, supporting a beautiful JSON LD for developers, and annotated with NIF, the Natural Language Processing Interoperability Framework, going beyond what a legislation will ever dare, but making these super useful insights exploitable.
Thank you very much, Elena. I think we're going to, it's a natural break for us there, so we're going to have to move on to our next presentation, but thank you very much for your insight. Our next speakers are Irmo Tax and Helena Crook from Taltech, and we're going to see about a three-dimensional tree, a legal act visualization as a three-dimensional tree. Are you there? Can we hear you? Irmo or Helena?
Thank you.
Irmo, you're there.
Hello.
Thank you very much. Let me hand over to you then.
Thank you. So, nice to see you. It was hopefully a good presentation before me, so I hope I can continue that way as you are doing. I'm going to share now my presentation and a little bit as an introduction. What we are going to show next is it's coming from actually a little bit past. I was working with lawyers in technical side for a long time, and these legal acts, they tend to change over time. So I got a request from one of my colleagues, please, can you develop me a solution which helps me to remind in which place something was changed within a specific law. And I couldn't answer back then, but afterwards I was looking a little bit around, and the second point of inspiration I got was regarding the legal paper text, which was used before the electronic time. Many of the lawyers actually bought a book regarding the specific legal act, but if it was changed afterwards, they tend to cut out lines and glue inside the paper books. So in the end, it was more like some sort of, I don't know, brush or something, not so much book anymore. But combining these two things together inspired me to develop a visualization. And the second, the introduction point I want to add is about the visualization itself. I think this is something which is unusual, and it's good because it's might show something different, might show something which is not visible from the first glance in the area which we are used to. So the good visualization actually moves a little bit out from the convenient zone, forces you to think, or anyone to think about what the hell it is. And that's what I am aiming for. So as I said, legislation changes over time. They are changing in many places. It's affecting the laws are linked. It's affecting the full network of laws. So it's important for any lawyer to keep track of these changes, what's new now, what's coming in the close future. And it's often complicated in electronic systems to compare those legal acts. Sometimes more than 2 legal acts are needed to compare, and this is something which is a bit hard to do. Then the changes come and come. At least in Estonia, we have a lot of changes in legislation, relatively new country. A lot of things need to be repaired and changed. And finally, some of these legal changes are already accepted, published, but not in force yet. So how to be aware when something is going to change and where it's going to change. So, and if we look at these changes a little bit deeper, which are made in legal text, they are not just technical replacement. They also affect the meaning behind the specific term which was changed, right? Changes happens over time. Again, we cannot do much about it. For example, marriage, right? 100 years ago, it was clearly about women and men. Now it's different. It might affect even bigger aspect, meaning the real concepts, general concepts behind the specific construction, legal construction. I choose as an example, individual liberties from 1787, which is the time when the British Parliament actually first time started to discuss about slavery issues and how to abandon it. So it has been gone through tremendous changes since. And also the technological advancements are bringing in a lot of changes in law, which needs revoking up a new type of legislations, perhaps also closing the old ones, telecommunication or cybercrime, which was not available 50 years ago or necessary 50 years ago. So I put up some legal hypotheses that changes have semantic value and they have temporal properties. How to link it to the current conference. First you make a visualization, then you try to understand what it is about. And definitely it's referring to temporal aspects of the law changes over time. So one way to visualize these references over time to make it clear, make it understandable, and this can be used as a semantic reference or in hand. So how to visualize these references? So if we consider the legal act as a living organism rather than something which is constant on time, then the closest example could be a tree, and that's actually followed the visual form the basis of the visualization, the build-up of the tree-like structure. So paragraphs in brown, divisions in green, subdivisions in yellow. Just one way to make it visible. And if we start from the top, from the paragraph first, and in the end of the legal act, then we get this kind of tree-like shape, which kind of visualizes the complexity, the build-up of the legal act. Also, we can add some additional features. On the right side, you can see the Employment Contract Act, which is written in or shown in red, showing that these paragraphs are not in force anymore. And to visualize the aspect of specific changes made over time, then there is an additional view which shows the lifespan of the legal act. On the left side, you see that this legal act has been in force for 18 years, and the changes are made in certain years. They are oriented in circular way so that it demonstrates the closest time when these changes have been made. So, so much about the starting talk. Let's try to show a little bit how it looks on the website. You can find this on our presentation deck. But here's the interview.
He's finishing.
Here you can. Yes. Can you see, please? I hope you can. You can see here 5 different legal acts. Let's choose a Family Law Act. That's a prototype. We didn't have it. All of them. Then clicking on the specific legal act, you can see how this legal act looks like. It's pretty messy and pretty intense, I would say. And there are some repealed elements. But also there is another view which helps to understand a little bit about the history, how this legal act was evolved. And this is again something you can use and see. Right now we can see that the main changes, a lot of changes have been made between 2014, 2015. And it's kind of illustrates also these parts which are a little bit lacking down or out of use. So why this is good for? I'm now back to going to my slides. Why this is good, useful for? As old saying says, the picture is worth 1,000 words. It's a good way. For me, it's more like art, right? It's kind of beautiful access to necessary information. It has, it gives a high level and compact view of the legal act, right? We can see in the front, without reading it, how complex it might be. It allows us to show all the different versions of legal act in the same visualization. It stretches over the past and to the present and also in the future if it's known, right? So we can have these 3 views at the same way. Where it can be used, one of the hope of mine is that it can be used for practicing lawyers and also legal drafters, so they can see when something was changed and hopefully get some hints where it has an effect if we change this part of the second one. Also, I think this kind of visualization helps to understand the legal act dynamic nature and time-related semantics aspects of the legislation. It's, at least from my point, it's really, really quickly changing world, and technology has to run with it. And another aspect, it helps to refer to semantic changes of legal thinking, so kind of visualizing the way how it's changed over the time. And how it can be used in future. Some practical aspects could be molded into one view. It can be expanded a little bit to statistics, how often it was changed, when it was changed, add some nice tricks and flags on it. To visualize, ease the access to the text, link it directly to paragraphs, and branches could be reveal actual text that show. So you just slide over the branches and you can see the specific paragraph or subdivision which is on the focus. So this was all I wanted to show you today. Thank you for watching. All right, some questions?
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ermo. We do indeed have some questions for you. I have one here saying, what kind of search functionalities are possible when legal acts are represented in a tree structure?
What kind of search is possible, right? It's more like visual search so far. It's not related directly to the context search so far, but it can be definitely developed in this direction. I hope I got the question right.
Sorry, Irma, I'm trying to see you there. Yes, thank you very much for that. We do appreciate your time and effort in taking this session for us very much indeed. So thank you very much, Irma, and thank you indeed to our earlier speaker, Elena, as well, for your interesting insight at this juncture. Now, what we're going to do over the next, we are going back into our format of the 15-minute presentations, and I do want lots of questions. Please do ask them in the chat function on WebEx. We also want you to keep sharing this stuff online. Use Twitter, use LinkedIn, use your social media, and use it, sharing it with the hashtag Endorse 2021. I also want to remind you of certain accounts that you can follow that will also give you information and keep you up to date with what we're talking about. There's EU Law Data Pubs, there's EU Publications, there's EU_Open Data, and EU Lex. And just a reminder, we're in track 1 today. There are other tracks as well. There's track 2, which is fundamentals, and track 3 on innovation. So do pick which one you want to follow, but a reminder again that all our sessions are being videoed and will be shared online after the event. So don't feel that you're missing out. You can always go back and have a look to see what's been going on in the other parallel sessions. This is the same format we're going to use tomorrow and Friday as well. So do make sure you tune in for more of that. I'm going to now turn to our next chunk of presentations before we have a final closing panel. We're going to hear about the visualization of complex legal knowledge as a must-needed Ariadne's thread to navigate the labyrinth of the different legislative frameworks. A lot of Greek allusions there. So to join us, to tell us a little bit more about that, please welcome Gabriele Di Matteo and Valerie Santo from the European Central Bank. Thank you very much. I can see you. There we go. Can you see and hear us?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Wonderful.
Perfect. So first of all, good afternoon, and thank you very much for giving us today the possibility to present about the visualization of complex legal knowledge in what we label here as a must-needed Ariadne's thread to navigate the labyrinth of the different legislative framework. Now, let me start by saying that today's presentation will be articulated in 3 parts. So first, we will a bit draw the map of the territory and also some of the constraints we actually face when we visualize the law. Secondly, we will also discuss what actually is the way in which we as KN team produce visualization and form of visuals. And finally, we will also look a bit at the future of legal knowledge visualization. So let's start with the basic. What is legal?
When I can see it's not there.
Sorry, can you?
Oh, sorry, Gabrielle, you can hear me. We're doing some technical stuff behind the scenes. Please continue with your presentation. Go right ahead. Sorry to interrupt you. Please go ahead with your presentation.
So, as I was saying, why do you should actually care about legal knowledge visualization? Why does it matter? Well, actually, it matters, and my answer would be because it's neuroergonomics. Every time you, as a lawyer, but also as a human being in general, you use your visual senses to look at an object like the law, for instance, a cognitive process takes place in our brain. And this cognitive process, which aimed actually at acquiring the knowledge, can be speeded up via legal knowledge visualization. And this is the reason why we also rely a lot on legal knowledge visualization in our day-to-day business. If we take a closer look, let's say, at the law field in general, the main reason why we use legal knowledge visualization are mainly four. Four are our main targets, indeed. To be able to effectively access the law in a faster way. Indeed, especially in an era like this one, characterized by a lot of information which travel at the speed of light and where digital transformation is characterizing everything, it's very important because of time constraints to be able to capture, let's say, the main characteristics of, let's say, the law. Also, we want to have an access to the law that remains precise, because legal knowledge visualization should not diminish the meaning of the text, let's say, of the law or case law, but should actually somehow enhancing it and even empowering it. Also, we want to know that what our lawyer is or she interpreting, it's actually correct. And that's why reliability is another very important point for us when we visualize something. Finally, accessibility is also absolutely essential. Indeed, we want to be able, our legal knowledge visualization, to somehow lower the entry door to many and complex legislative frameworks, as we also mentioned in our title, because of course, due to the complexity of the law and the growing complexity of the different legislative framework, it's very important to be able to understand each other also as lawyers. But in general, let me say, also for the general public. Then, if we look at legal knowledge visualization from the perspective, let's say, of the process to effectively produce a visual, let me stress that the process to visualize is something that should be understood as a sort of spiral, as you can see here. Indeed, not always legal knowledge visualization process is something linear, but sometimes it may be needed to go back to one of the steps we will now mention. For sure, the first step, especially in our case as a knowledge management team, when we need to visualize something, is the request, which may come from different legislative divisions, like, for instance, banking supervision or institutional law. After we receive the request, which deals with a specific legal challenge, we need to analyze such question. The analysis is very important because already here, let's say, we as KM experts usually are able to somehow see what could be the interest point of view from which to tackle a specific legal challenge, what to visualize, and so on. Then there is the research part. And this is actually one of the most important part and also one of the most cumbersome, as you will see later on during this presentation. Then we have the production, the actual production of the visual. And this production, of course, will depend on the type of visual we need to produce, the complexity of it. We could use one or more tech tools, depending again on the type of visual. But the final output, indeed, it's really the result of this activity of polishing after multiple iterations. And actually, again, it may be possible after you finish a visual to go back to adjust, listening to the feedback of the different lawyers involved. So, having described, let's say, the process to produce a visual, let's now talk a bit about the constraints we face in our day-to-day job. Now, first of all, one of the biggest constraints we face is related to the so-called technological barrier. This refers both to the technology, let's say, literacy of the average lawyer we interact with. Sometimes they do not find very user-friendly the tools we rely to produce the visual, and therefore, it would be better to have something which is more accessible, let's say, not only for a KM expert who masters perfectly, let's say, the tools he needs to visualize and use to visualize. Also, sometimes they miss law-oriented features because, let's be clear, law, it's a special animal somehow. It has its own characteristics, and therefore, it would be better sometimes to have tools specifically tailor-made for the law. Then we have the side of databases. Indeed, as I was mentioning before, research is one of the most cumbersome part in the legal knowledge visualization process. And of course, a lot of research is done on different databases. In our case, most of the research is done on EU law-based databases, but most of them sometimes also miss a proper metadata system or proper filtering option, which could slow down a bit the research activity. Also, some of them miss visual navigation clues or option, which would speed up somehow this part of the process of legal knowledge visualization. Finally, interoperability. This is also a very important point because what we see sometimes is that there is a tendency to work in silos, both from, let's say, the perspective of the databases providers or the different tools providers. And this, again, can impair negatively the possibility to effectively and impactfully visualize the law. Now, having drawn a bit and described what is the actual map of the territory, let's now see how we, as a knowledge management team, produce visual. What you see here actually is an example of a word cloud we produce for one of our legislation division. In particular, this visual was focused on the, let's say, understanding of the criteria to consider when calculating a specific sanction. Now, let me stress this, that this visual was not meant to solve a specific legal policy or challenge, but it was meant more to serve as a sort of navigation tool. So again, to facilitate the process of knowledge acquisition and transferring. Now, a lot of time in order to produce this visual was spent on the research again. Since this legal challenge was mostly related to EU law, we spent a lot of time on EURLEX and Curia, as well as on our internal databases and our internal document management system to look for past legal advices. The concrete realization was done, on the other hand, mostly via PowerPoint, but also via Tableau to see whether our data were showing interesting patterns to eventually be visualized. So the final result, indeed, was capable at a glance somehow to offer the different criteria to consider in the calculation of the sanction, as well as the weight of each of these criteria. Additionally, there were also some references to, let's say, the cases from which the word cloud was based on. Now, even though this visual was highly appreciated by our, let's say, legal team, at the same time, the way in which we see the future of legal knowledge visualization actually is a bit different. Indeed, one of our biggest dreams would be in the future to make legal knowledge visualization something which could impact the day-to-day business of any legal practitioner, irrespectively, let's say, of a KM expert who is capable of mastering the tool and produce the visual for themselves. So what you see here is actually the way in which we imagine in the future any legal practitioner interacting, for instance, with a sort of legal research portal based on a knowledge graph, where all the data sources from which the information and knowledge showed is captured is taken practically by the different data sources, like external one for like EURLEX or Curia, as well as internal one like physical sources or databases. To give you a better idea about what we mean by this, let's say, shift to a sort of tool capable of lowering, let's say, the entry barrier of legal knowledge visualization, here I put next to each other the actual status of legal knowledge visualization, at least how we do it as a KM team, and how in the future we would like to do it. So on one hand, we have what we have just seen before. So the methodology of calculation of sanction. In this case, to produce it, to produce such a visual, a lot of time was spent in the research and also in the practical realization of it because of actually missing automation, and also because of the fact that many of the data sources that were used to capture the information were actually different and scattered. Also, there was a very high risk of knowledge dispersion due to the fact that most of the work was practically done by a human again. And also, another thing that I would like to stress is that this sort of visual, even though was appreciated, still was missing somehow interactivity. Therefore, we would like to move to something different, where actually, as in this case, for instance, in the form of a knowledge graph, the knowledge visualized remains the same. Indeed, potentially here you would again have the criteria to calculate the sanction, but this time, actually, everything would be automated and digitally created. Practically, you would have something which is embedded already in a tool available and at the disposal of any legal practitioner to be able to navigate the law and even to be able to see new insights that were hidden in the text, like, for instance, statistics about the production of cases over the year. And this would really make a difference also because this would decrease substantially the risk of knowledge dispersion and therefore the risk of actually missing relevant information. To conclude, we actually believe that three will be the elements to somehow realize this shift. We are perfectly aware that this shift is not going to be easy. Actually, it's going to take a lot of effort, both from the side, let's say, of the lawyers, but also from the side of the technologists, let's say. But three will be the main elements to realize it. First of all, structured databases with a proper metadata system, a proper taxonomy and ontology. In our case, in particular, with regards to EU law. Secondly, API capable of of connecting the different, let's say, databases, as well as automation, in particular in the form of machine learning. Why machine learning? Because of its inherent characteristic of improving with, let's say, the feedback provided by the users, in this case, by lawyers. Thanks to these three elements, we believe it would be possible to realize what we call here centralized system of available knowledge, where actually the center is still the lawyer, is still the human and his or her analytical skills, but actually boosted by such a tool capable of connecting the different dots of the labyrinth of the different legislative frameworks, to be able to realize what we call here legal knowledge visualization 2.0, that in other words would simply mean democratizing legal knowledge visualization for any legal practitioner and to effectively make an impact in the day-to-day business. And with this, I actually thank you for your attention. I leave the floor for possible questions.
Thank you, Gabriele. We have a couple of questions just to come in. So briefly, in just a moment or two, in the research activity, do you also consider case law information? Did you reflect on possible solutions there?
Yes, actually, one of the main aim of this, magic tool we are referring to would be to be capable of connecting the different pieces of the law, because of course the law is done via legislation, but also via case law. So to be able to also connect, case law to a specific piece of legislation would definitely boost incredibly our possibility of grasping, let's say, the different data sources and knowledge.
And are there any specific tools that you plan to use in order to improve the knowledge visualization?
Well, actually, one of the main reasons of this presentation was, to start a discussion on the type of tool that we could use. We know there are some tools out there, like, for instance, Loreto. Loreto is actually a very good tool to do this. But what we miss right now, let's say, is a sort of scaling up of such tools. They are still not, let's say, used at a high level or by the majority, let's say, of knowledge management team. And we are aiming at effectively improve this in a better way.
Thank you very much, Gabriele, and thank you very much to our audience for your questions. Do keep them coming, as we have many more interesting speakers for you. But let me remind you once again that you can go to slido.com, put in that ENDORSE code, ENDORSE 2021, and under the section polls, you'll be able to take part in a survey. We really do want you to fill in as much of that as possible so that we can provide feedback. It's all about gathering knowledge over the next 4 days, so please do that when you get a chance. But of course, we continue with our presentations, and we are now going to have a visual exploration of European case law, the Smart Files Network. And here to present that, it's Veronica Haberler. Hi, Veronica. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, let's just check. We can see and hear you. We can certainly see you. Can we hear you? No, we can't at this point hear you. How we got?
So now you can.
Now we
Hi.
can. Splendid. Thank you so much. It's over to you. You've got 15 minutes or a little bit less if we want to take some questions as well.
Okay, perfect. So I will start the screen sharing. So I hope you can see my slides now. Yes, perfect. So this lightning talk is about visualizing case law using Eurolax data. My name is Veronica, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Austrian legal tech company Loreto. We are all about working with digital legal texts and documents and finding new and, of course, hopefully smart ways to work and interact with legal information. And now I will present our winning project from the EU Datathon 2019, the Smart Files Network. The main objective was to visualize case law cited in PDF documents of users and draw a case law citation network in real time. While we already had some key technology for the project up and running, it was the first time for us working with Eurolax data and visualizing data in citation network maps. We needed to enhance our search and linking engine and build up a case law linked PDF database with court decisions ourselves. And for the graph visuals, we use network analysis methods. Next, I will tell a bit about the data and the technology used and share our experiences and the challenges. And I will, of course, do a presentation of the app. So we used EUROLEX and national case law datasets and the Eurovoc thesaurus. And the most important metadata for us and for the app were and are the case law identifiers and the case numbers, the URLs to web and PDF content, the subject matters, the dates, and the PDF files. Then we used our existing knowledge framework technology to extract information, enriching the plain PDFs from EUROLEX and RIS with source link to case law and calculate the in and out degrees of the case law decisions. So we faced some challenges in the project as well. It wasn't too easy to find the best data sets and decide on the most promising file format for our use case. The data quality of the data sets wasn't clear for us in the beginning of the project, so we encountered some issues during the process with missing values in metadata or missing content. So not all decisions were available as PDFs, for example. Especially that problem occurred across the different databases. And like in any other projects, you will always have to deal with the user's real world. As we aim to analyze documents from our users, the data input is not standardized, which makes it a bit more complicated as we need to deal with that too. So you will find typos or different types of citation styles of case law. And unfortunately, the European case law identifier isn't a common citation style. Most people and courts use the case number to cite case law instead. But in the end, we finished a quite presentable proof of concept and open beta ready app for the EU Datathon. And yeah, let's take a quick tour through our citation network tool. That's the start screen of our search page before starting the analysis and the visualization of PDF. You can do a PDF-based search to recognize and visualize case law, and this is done by a drag and drop or the file explorer. After the analysis, there are 4 main elements in our interface. There is the landscape and citation network map of the PDF. We feature an interactive data overview to interact with the visuals. In the case law info box you see here, you will find more information on the selected node. And then we have our checkout options. So let's start with the citation network map. That map is a knowledge graph based on cited case law. And the red icon, the red PDF icon you see here, represents your analyzed file in the network visualization. Then you see the nodes representing the cited case law in our PDF. The light blue ones are the first level citations. That means they are mentioned in the analyzed PDF. And the darker ones are the second level citations that are cited in the first level citation sources. The edges are the connections between the case law, and the particle flow represents the direction of the connection. The node size indicates the relevance within the shown network of first and second level citations. But if we hit the relativity switch in the top right corner, the node sizes change and now represent the relevance within the whole EUROLEX case law data. So you get a totally different impression of the case law context of your PDF. A side note regarding the term relevance. Of course, it's absolutely debatable whether the relevance of a source can be meaningfully measured by a citation index. It is definitely important for me to emphasize that we have used a number of citations to determine relevance in our project, but there are certainly many other ways of defining a relevant source. So let's move on with the elements. With our interactive data overview, you can explore the list of first-level citations and the generated network analysis data. The in-degree is a value representing the relevance measured by the amount of citations of the decision within the EUROLEX network, and therefore that value can change over time, of course. The out-degree shows the case law fundedness, so to say, of a node. That means how many EUROLEX decisions are cited within. That is a constant value, as it won't change anymore over time after the publication of the decision. Then there is the list of the top subject matters of the citation network and filter and highlighting options for further exploration. If you're especially interested in a shown case law decision, just click on the node and open the node info box. You will find the case law metadata of the selected node with the link to the source in EUROLEX, metadata like the case number, the ECLI, the date, title, and ruling court, and the subject matters of the node. And they can vary from the top subject matter selection of our network. If you want to dive deeper into a specific subject matter, you can start a search in EUROLEX by clicking on it. And now let's have a look at some video footage of the Smart Files network. So first, we start the analysis of our PDF and wait for the visualization of our citation network map to show up. You can explore the network by clicking on the nodes. You can rearrange them. And by hitting the EURELEVANCE button, you get the citation relevance within the whole EUROLEX dataset of the case law decisions. And on the left side, we have our filter and highlight options. And by hovering over the sidebar entries, you can highlight a case law node or all cases with a specific subject matter. And you can filter the network by date with the date slider here. Yes. So yeah, my last slide. If you want to give it a try by yourself, go to smartfiles.lireto.at, where I've provided you with some demo files to start a visualization of a citation network map right away. And please keep in mind that the tool is an open beta version and not a market-ready product. So thank you very much. I hope it was interesting for you, and don't forget to get and stay in touch via social media or email. And if you have some questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Veronica. We do indeed have some questions. First one, given variety of talks on visualization, our questioner is wondering if you've attempted any usability testing and can share the results, for example, improvement of task completion time versus binary search.
Well, we haven't done A and B testing. It sounds a bit like that. But so it was just to find new ways to search and show the context of case law, and maybe just to explore. It's more a playful way to interact with case law data while doing research.
Okay, well, RIS is the legal information system of Austria. Are there any plans to expand or offer this tool to national case law of other EU countries? This is the sort of question we've been asked a lot over the last couple of days.
So at least the data set is from the EUROLEX as well, and I'm aware that the EUROLEX team is working on getting more national case law there as well. as it's quite tricky to get the data across Europe in different databases.
Okay, thank you very much, Veronica, for that. And do stay with us. We've got some more interesting conversations coming up. So I hope maybe you yourself could ask questions of our other speakers. I look forward to that sort of interaction as well. Just to remind you, once again, please do go to Slido to fill in our survey. You can go to slido.com, click on the polls option after you've put in the ENDORSE 2021 hashtag, and there's a selection of questions there. Give as comprehensive or short answers as you want, but do please answer them, and do please keep sharing your thoughts on Twitter and on social media with that ENDORSE 2021 hashtag. Now, we go on to our next speaker. It's about court decisions and the real big challenge for legal big data, how the ECLI framework helps to improve the accessibility of huge case law databases. Joining us to talk about that from the Publications Office of the Netherlands, we have Mark van Oipenen. Mark, are you there and can you see and hear us? Great, I can see you and we can see the screen.
Yes, can you hear me as well?
It's a little bit fuzzy, but we can hear you if you speak up.
Yes, okay. So thank you very much. I'm going to talk about court decisions as well, which are being published in rapidly growing volumes all over Europe. From a perspective of legal information management, these huge volumes can pose some serious challenges. So let's dive into this specific challenge that court decisions pose. If you are not a lawyer, the nature of court decisions or case law, I use those terms interchangeably, might be hard to grasp. The conference website offers an interesting starting point. The topic of this day is law as code, which underlines the need to make legislation more machine readable. But as any lawyer can tell you, the law is not just to be found in legislation, it is also found in case law. Without it, judges, scholars, legal practitioners, and citizens would only know half the law. But from the perspective of law as code, there are some interesting differences between those two sources. Legislation is prescriptive. It formulates the rules of the societal game. Case law, on the other hand, is descriptive. It tells us how legislation should be applied and interpreted. And while legislative documents are quite structured, court decisions are not. Although they describe facts, there are considerations and finally a decision. Often that is all the machine-readable structure there is. And of course, volumes differ. We have thousands of laws with millions and millions of court decisions. And although the Constitution is more important than some ministerial decree, basically all legislation in force needs to be known. But of those millions of court decisions, only a small fraction is relevant to other people than those involved in the case. But who or what will decide on that? And from the European perspective, the formal relation between national and European legislation is explicit. But to detect in national decisions what is relevant from an EU perspective is much harder. So, for legislation, law as code might be perceived and structured as some kind of business rules. Although I immediately admit that these rules are extremely complex to translate into computer code. But due to the nature of case law, we cannot code it. We can only try to discover the legal knowledge it contains. Of course, we have classic information retrieval, but that is not enough. Maybe we need some AI. Discovering and structuring the legal knowledge that is hidden in court decisions has been studied by the AI and law community for more than 40 years, and this recent and highly recommendable book by Kevin Ashley gives a good overview of all that work. But much of it is still in an experimental stage and not usable for daily legal practice. And we can also learn from the book that we cannot have AI if we do not have IA, information architecture. To start with, we need seemingly simple stuff like sound and unequivocal identifiers and metadata. The more we go down this non-exhaustive list, the harder it gets. Machine-readable references, thesauri, ontologies, argumentation schemes. And to cater for the very first steps, the Council adopted the ECLI standard in 2001. It contains rules for the European case law identifier itself, for a set of uniform metadata, which I'm not going to discuss today, and for the ECLI search engine. First of all, the identifier itself. It is meant to be usable by humans for making textual references to court decisions as well as by computers. It has the same format everywhere in Europe. It always contains 5 elements separated by columns. The first element is the abbreviation ECLI itself, to tell humans and computers what they are dealing with. The second element is the EU code for the jurisdiction, a country or an international organization. The third element is an abbreviation of the court rendering the decision. This court code is decided upon at the national level. Then we have the year of the decision, and finally some code to make the identifier unique. It does have some formatting rules, but it is decided upon at the national level as well. Then the ECLI search engine. It is part of the European e-Justice portal built and maintained by the European Commission. If, as a court, you assign ECLIs to your decisions, it is not obliged to have them indexed by the ECLI search engine, but the European findability it offers is one of the great advantages of the ECLI framework. The search engine offers a simple search and an advanced search, and any public case law database can connect. This offers the advantage, as you can see here, that one can easily detect the presence of a particular decision in more than one repository. In this example, in the original language in a Dutch database, and with English and French summaries in another. So, what is the current state of play? As you can see on the left-hand side, ECLI has been implemented at the national level by 18 EU member states and 3 European courts, while 3 countries are still working on an implementation. On the right-hand side, you can see that of those 21 jurisdictions having implemented ECLI, 16 have connected to the ECLI search engine, which now contains more than 11 million decisions. So that's going to look a little bit like real big data. As a result of the EU co-funded project building on ECLI, a revised version of the technical standard was developed, which was adopted by Council in 2019. I highlight some of the most important additions. First, there is a slash-based variant next to the column-based. And there's also a standardized HTTP URI variant that has a neutral domain, ecli.eu. Then we have much more interesting metadata. And we have a new annex containing a citation guide prescribing how to use ECLI. And finally, the last addition, which is the ECLI extension language. This extension language has been developed to cover the need for more granularity in identifying and citing court decisions. It follows the functional requirements for bibliographical records, a standard that is being used by Accomodatore and other legal documentation standards as well. Here we can see an example of the extension language. There is also a syntax with slashes or as HTTP URI. The ECLI remains the ECLI. It identifies the abstract work, and in most cases it is sufficient, especially for citation purposes. The extension language starts after the ECLI. First, the expression, in this example for a language as well as a temporal variant. Then the manifestation, which is the document format, and then, very important, the fragment, enabling a standardized, although very flexible way to structure a court decision and to reference specific parts of it, which can be, by example, very relevant for a citation network, as we saw in the previous presentation. So, is there anything left for the future? Well, of course, quite a lot, actually. Let's return to the slide about the information architecture. So ECLI fixed the problems of the identifier, although the new features have to be implemented both at the national level as well as within the ECLI search engine. Metadata, check. The new metadata are all optional, but the more, the better, of course. Then the interesting problem of references. Judges make quite a lot of references to legislation, jurisprudence, and academic writings. And for lawyers, it is very important to be able to find case law referencing a specific paragraph of law or another court decision. But for a normal lawyer using a normal search engine, this is an impossible task due to the tens of nicknames, identifiers, and spelling variants used for such citations. So we need a smart reference parser. What they actually do is finding the legal references in a piece of plain text like this, canonicalize them, and turn them into hyperlinks. So this is the result of such a reference parser. Of course, these links can be stored in a linked data repository and not only used for searching and browsing, but also for smart algorithms and all types of research, like we saw also in the previous presentation. The software demonstrated on the previous slide was developed in the Netherlands. But within the Bo-Ackley project I mentioned before, a software development kit was built that can be adapted to different languages and national citation styles. It is available for everybody on GitLab. And finally, when it comes to theory, ontologies, argumentation schemes, and so on, some academic explorative research has been undertaken, but a lot of work still remains to be done. So those might be the next challenging steps for developing a sound legal information architecture. So thank you for your attention. I hope I was not going too fast. Otherwise, please do read my paper. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much indeed. That was very, very interesting, and I'm sure there's lots to take away from it. We do also have a question now from our audience. You argue that one of the areas where future work is done is in augmentation schemes. What do you mean by that? What do you mean with these augmentation schemes?
Such argumentation schemes can be used to structure the legal arguments that are put forward in a case. So you can actually make those argumentations, those legal argumentations, computer readable. And that is something that is really out of scope of the Ackley framework, but on the academic side, there's a lot of work going on there. And what the point I was actually trying to make is that from the AI law community, a lot of work has been put in research on, for example, ontologies and argumentation schemes, while we are still lacking the most basic information architecture components, like sound identifiers and common metadata. And to cater for that, the Ackley framework has been developed.
Okay, I think hope that answers our question. Thank you very much for your presentation. And do stay with us, so we will have more presentations, and I hope you'll maybe be able to enter into the chat and have a discussion with your fellow presenters as well. Let me remind you all once again, I know you're used to me saying this, but please do go to Slido and fill out the survey. And of course, use the chat function to ask questions of our speakers. We are going to have a big panel debate to wrap up the end, and I'm sure our speakers and moderators will be delighted to have as many questions from you as possible. But before that, we have one last 15-minute rapid presentation, modeling legislation as a graph in the Open Trust Fabric's prose object model. So joining us from Common Accord to tell us a bit more about that, we have James Hazard. James, thank you very much. Over to you.
Hello. Hello, all. You can hear me. I'm not de-unmuted.
No.
Very good. Thank you. So why don't I slip right into my presentation, share content screen, and not my email, but the presentation. View. Slideshow. So in some respects, I'm a warm-up for the keynote tomorrow by Sally Geyer and Luigi Telesca, who will be speaking about the Open Trust Fabric. This is a contracts-oriented semantic web model. It's been developed by me over some years. I am, as we say here, merely a lawyer and have been doing contract documents for 30 or 40 years. And it seemed to me that we needed a different set of tools for doing contract documents. If we could work in structure, then we could work better, more efficiently. We also could work in a way that was machine readable, and we could eliminate most of the redundancy of contracts, which is its great sin. So they will be speaking tomorrow about, Sally and Luigi will be speaking tomorrow about the Open Trust Fabric and the modeling the EU economy as an ecosystem of contracts. I'll sort of take a lawyer's point of view on this. How would we as lawyers get with a semantic web model? And show you how we've essentially reduced this to its simplest possible format and dealt with the number one problem of any semantic web approach from a lawyer's perspective, which is that a lawyer gets brought into a situation because things are not the same. The reason that you're there is because some part of the thing is new, at least to somebody. So you all know about linked data, so I don't think we need to go into that. Of course, linked data can express whole schemas of contract flows. So this is just a little, just to show, we've done in this prose object model a model form from the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, which then you pluck all the text off of it and you dump it back on in 3 different languages. You then create an object for the study, and then the consent actually done by the clinician with the patient can be done essentially as a tweak on that. It uses a very simple model. We've been sort of through this with MIT Connection Science, particularly in connection with the data security and data minimization perspective. There's a theory to it, which is essentially key values organized into objects that have links to other similar objects. Those are the prose objects. You can do whole transaction flows. You can memorialize this however you want, locally, on a website, with a blockchain. Should be essentially medium agnostic, as it should be essentially format agnostic. Could use XML or JSON or whatever. We've come to, and with considerable help from Primavera de Filippi, who some of you will know, come to a much simpler format, which is essentially cruftless. So you just have a key name equals, and then the value of the string, and the value continues until you hit a carriage return. And then you can just reference the other nodes in the system with a prefix or without a prefix. The prefixing is an include as kind of notion. You can, so this is just, we've got tons of examples. This is an example of a non-disclosure agreement. You reference the 2 parties. Those are objects, so they know lots of information about the parties. You reference the form of document. You tweak it as you wish. You can pull options. The very last thing here, there's the author of the solution has set up a number of alternatives. So you can go in and fish one of those out of the underlying object. Of course, you can express essentially anything that can be presented on a screen as a document. You can express in the same format. Legislation is relevant. That's not our sweet spot, but you can see how if you, we've already seen, if you have any real solution ultimately requires you to be able to hop links back to court cases and legislation. The life cycle of a transaction can be long. It can include dispute resolution. You could include the standard phrases from organizations like the ICC. If you use their stuff and also you use a model form, then they would probably already know a good deal of what they need to know about the transaction. It can also be tied into ontologies and should be. So through Harold Stieber at the Commission and Francis Gross at the European Central Bank, we know that the actus ontology is of great interest to them. So one could reference that in defining a financial relationship, a lease, or what have you. And then the machine could know a lot about the transaction because you made reference to the ontology. That's pretty much my presentation. Where our focus is contracts in both the legal sense of all that boilerplate that you have to sign to do anything, and also in the economics sense of the little tiny document snippets that describe relationships, including all the e-commerce stuff and trading on a stock exchange and all of that. So that's the Commission's modeling the EU economy as an ecosystem of contracts. We have a well-developed body of materials here, very much novices in the field of semantic web. I am merely a lawyer, and love to have connections with anybody who's interested in sort of connecting up structured information to the pointy end of transacting, that is contracts. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. We were a bit ahead of time, so actually we have a question for you. Is there any query language to retrieve information from data sets using prose object?
So you would, that's a perfect question. I would expect that if you had a large set of these things, you would essentially map it into a graph database, and then you would use whatever query language that you use in a graph database. The whole document rendering system, which is the core of this, is essentially one graph query. We sort of expressed it once in Neo4j. This is a way of essentially organizing information into a graph, and then you would use whatever tools you wanted to use.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just going to give our audience any more questions. Please use the chat function, and we will try and put them to our speakers. And I will also remind you to share on social media using the hashtag ENDORSE2021. Well, there doesn't seem to be any more questions for you. I guess that's because you've been so comprehensive, totally, James. You've covered everything. So with that, I will let you go. Thank you very much indeed. But I hope you can stay with us for the final part of our conference this afternoon. It should be a really interesting and interactive discussion. As I said, we're finished this last section a little bit ahead of time. And of course, we had envisaged a break for you. So perhaps you can take a little bit of the extra time to fill out our survey and also to grab yourself a cup of coffee and get ready for the final panel, which is going to be a panel discussion. You're going to hear from great speakers. We're going to have presentations, and there's going to be 3 separate moderators, some of whom you've heard from already today. It will be on semantic interoperability in the legal domain. So stay with us. We will be back with that at 4:15. Welcome back to the final stages of day 2 of the European Data Conference on Reference Data and Semantics. Now, we have, as I say, a panel discussion for you. We are going to be discussing semantic interoperability in the legal domain, challenges, benefits, and its use cases. I do urge you during this to use the chat function to ask questions of our panelists. Our moderators will put them to them. So, our moderators today are Enrico from the Publications Office of the European Union, Dann from the Ministry of State in Luxembourg, we've already heard from, and Enrico Francesconi from the European Parliament. Gentlemen, welcome back. So let me see if we can see and hear you all before I hand over to you to introduce your panelists and presenters. Enrico. Hi.
Yes, hello. Yeah, hi.
Thank you for being there. And I believe John and Enrico, we have you two there as well. And Enrico, wonderful. A full set of 3. In which case, I will hand over into your accomplished hands to run this panel.
Thank you very much. Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining this panel discussion. I am going to introduce you shortly the structure of the panel so that you know what is going on and what is going to happen after what. And then I will give you the floor to Enrico and John to highlight you a little bit about the whole topic of semantic interoperability. So in this panel discussion, we are going to start with 2 use cases of the practical implementation of semantic web standards in the national legislation. We are going to hear from Dr. Fotis Fitsilis, Veronique Folders, and Raf Bell. We will introduce you the speakers before the use cases. So we will have 2 presentations. After, of course, already during the presentations, you can raise your questions, so please add them to the chat. We are going to discuss them with the speakers. And after these 2 use cases, we are going to move on to the actual roundtable with 4 panelists. So Enrico and John will moderate this panel discussion. We will have some dedicated questions to our speakers. They are going to elaborate their replies. And of course, in the meantime, if you have anything else to add, please raise your question to the chat. So I will give the floor to Enrico and John for a short introduction, and then we will move on with the use cases.
Okay, now I think you can hear me. Okay, good. Thank you very much for taking part to this panel, afternoon panel. Actually, I think it's a very interesting opportunity to show, to underline the importance of the semantic web in the legal domain, as well as we have done in the previous section. Actually, this is because of several reasons. First of all, for the technicality of the legal information, which is particularly well suited for being represented in the according to the semantic web concept. Consider, for example, the complexity of the lawmaking process or the need to upkeep the legal order, monitoring the impact of new norms, or managing the timeline of and versioning of legal documents. All these kind of things are aspects that can be effectively modeled within using the semantic web standards and, for example, the linked open data approach to the semantic web. Moreover, it's important to know that, for example, legal user information needs are so peculiar, and they can benefit very much from the implementation of the semantic web in the legal domain, because, for example, they are not interested only in retrieving documents, but, for example, accessing norms or making relations between norms and having support to legal reasoning. Well, for all these aspect, I think that the semantic web is a very interesting opportunity to provide advanced services for the end users and for those people who have to manage legal information. John, I don't know if you want to add something.
I think you said everything, Enrico. It's true. We're speaking about semantic web nowadays, and we, the experts, know we could not actually live without it. But people, I think, still don't see the real benefit of it. I think, and that's why it's important to see projects like we just going to see now, the two projects we're going to see right now. What is the real benefit of it, and where does the semantic web standards really incorporate into something very new? So I think that's enough from my side, and let's get moving to something interesting. Meaning, I guess, Enrico, you're going to present the speakers.
Yes, thank you very much, John. So the first speaker is Dr. Fotis Pitsilis. He's head of department for the scientific documentation and supervision in the Hellenic Parliament. And Fotis, the floor is yours. You can start your presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Enrico. Thanks, everybody, for watching. It's an honor to be here, obviously, and thanks to the organizers for putting together such a great event. Let's get it going, because time flies. My presentation is on a proof of concept, and now it should be online, on a transformation of Greek law in rule as code, or law as code, if you prefer, domain. I will start by presenting a brief definition of what are we going to debate about, present our research partnerships, because understandably, parliaments or the public sector cannot necessarily do that alone. They need to go into collaboration with other entities, and we found a very unique partnership and to proceed with our rule as code approach. Then you need to define, and I will present our proof of concept in order to get into a technology or into a technological concept. Usually, one does not go around a proof of concept. We start with something small. We show how it's done, and present a step-by-step guide to our officials, which are the political layer. And if everything is done correctly, then we get the green light to proceed with something bigger, like a pilot, before going finally into production with something like that. So what is it law as code? It's rather simple. It's how you can draft rules or law in machine consumable language, code. And it's all started back in 2019, not long ago, actually, from the Observatory of Public Sector Innovation of the OECD, and created into a sort of a greater trend. One of the biggest advantages is that this approach is language and technology agnostic. So it can be embedded on top of other technologies that are around, like the semantic web technologies. What it is, technically, it promotes so-called isomorphism, which is the equivalency of code and law. So because law, by definition, or as it is drafted, if I may say, creates ambiguities, it does not have a certain meaning. This is why, after all, if something does not go well, it has to be decided by court. So what the actual meaning of a law is. By law as code or rule as code, you can circumvent all this, or a great deal of this, by giving your law or your code a unique meaning. Our partnership that we have created is between Smart Legal, which is a Wellington-based company in New Zealand, and the Hellenic OCR team, which is a scientific network which sits on top of the Hellenic Parliament and spans across the Parliament, the private sector, and academia. And we created here, we try to create here added value by transforming law into something that has a better meaning or more meaning to the stakeholders of the law, which are the civil servants, which are individuals like citizens or corporations. Traditionally, we had a law, and first we typed the law into a digital document, like a Microsoft Word file. Then it came a structural advancement using a standard like a Commentoso. So from this law, we could create a structural representation as an open legal data. And with ruler's code approach, we create another enhancement. We create a so-called semantic evolution, a non-standardized evolution yet, where you create, or one could create, could transform the law into something, into code that has a unique meaning. Where are we now? We have built a consortium. We have put an interdisciplinary team together of 5 persons across several disciplines. We have lawyers, we have linguists, we have computer scientists. We have designed a training curriculum on how to train them. And we started training the team. And the next level is to complete the proof of concept by transforming a full law. Right now we have transformed a single article of it to ruler's code. Let's see how it's done. I'm not obviously going to go through the whole process, but what we do is we break down the law into its semantic elements, but by using basic Boolean algebra, basic logical blocks. True, false, greater than, smaller than, if, then, else. And by using such simple language, we break down the parts of the law into code. And if done correctly, then there is no ambiguity. We can go through the whole line of thought, of legal thought, without having any ambiguities. And since there are no ambiguities, one can create a logical diagrams, and ex ante can prove how the law operates. And this is particularly useful in environments where there's heavy regulation, like the banking sector or the taxation sector, because if you can design a law that has a unique meaning, its action ex ante has a unique meaning ex post, then it is fairly easy to design systems that understand this regulation, this type of regulation, these rules as code. And you can imagine that you can change your taxation laws as often as you would like, as the Ministry of Finance you would like, and your systems would be would be updated at all times, because there would be no manual intervention to update them. They would understand the law, the updated law, each time it pops up with a different in a different form. Ideally, and I conclude with that, this is not to completely change the way legislation is made. This is to complement legislation. And in my ideal world, in my ideal legislative world, a law would be enacted with a triplet. A law as it is today, in a human readable format, in a human language format, a rulers code like I presented that is machine readable and can be updated into systems that can read this type of language. And additionally, in a structured language format like Alcomantoso, so that it is also available as open legal data. Thank you very much for this, and I'm at your disposal for follow-up discussion.
Thank you very much for this. And we have some questions coming from the public. Did you reflect on the characteristics of a law where it would not be advisable to structure it as a code?
Yes, indeed. We do understand that not every law is ideal for this kind of approach. Therefore, we searched a lot for a law to be able to be transformed into rulers code. There are multiple problems. For time reasons, let me tell you just one. The way laws are made today or the way we legislate is by continuously change existing laws. So we don't legislate from scratch. So by this, it is very difficult to apply rulers code in a messy legislative environment, let's say. Therefore, our proof of concept was carefully designed to select a law where something was created from scratch. So there was no legal precedent there. And this was very difficult, obviously, since most of societal regulations is based on pre-existing regulations.
Thank you very much. And we have another question from Aldo. Aldo, you can actually raise it yourself because I just wanted to ask the other panelists to add their questions.
Yeah, here I am. I'm just commenting on top of what has been already said, but my question is why we don't use semantic technologies to deal with the complexity of law instead of, I don't know in detail the proposal from Smart Law, but it looks a bit like enforcing disambiguation in a quite brittle way compared to the nuances, for example, of jurisprudential context in continental Europe.
Yes, obviously there's not a single way to do that, and there are possibly many many ways to find the semantics in the law. The problem right now, as I see it, is that it's a non-standardized environment, and many individual companies. There are many approaches worldwide that try to fix this issue, and there is from the OASIS or from the standardization body. There's a technical committee working on legal rule ML, but still they're not as far as they have reached with a legal doc ML that evolved into a Alcomantoso in a full-blown standard. So still, and to conclude with that, I think it is worth evaluating many approaches before finally eventually reaching a point where an approach reaches standard status. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we can continue because I see that there are other questions coming in the chat. If we have time in the panel discussion, we can still come back to these. Otherwise, we can get you in touch with the questions, asking them. So we will save all the questions. Thank you. So let's move on to the next use case presentation from Belgium. So Veronique Volders and Raf Bell from the Flemish government, from the Flemish Agency for Local Authorities and for Digital Flanders. So let's see their presentations with the title Semantics at Your Fingertips.
So thank you for the invitation to share the insights from the region of Flanders in Belgium. Now, each day, local governments take a lot of local council decisions, which is in fact local legislation. On the next slide, I can't see the slides moving. Okay, there we are. So these decisions, they contain valuable information. For instance, a road diversion in the city of Berchem, the change of parking fees in the city of Ghent, and the appointment of a new mayor in the city of Hasselt. Now, this is extremely relevant, not only to the government, but also to the citizens and businesses as well. Now, it's relevant to them, but what's the problem is that the information is locked away in non-transparent silos. It can't be reused very easily. This was the fact in the past, but now we've built an ecosystem based on standards and linked open data. So the principles of linked data, as Enrico and John eloquently explained. Now, what's the goal of the ecosystem within the region of Flanders, which in fact is already in place, already in production, is that local authorities, they make decisions using the same standards. And those standards are already embedded in the regional legislation. For instance, this is an example of the appointment of a mandate, which is in fact already in production. Now, the information is published, it's authentic data because the local government is the authentic source and published on the website as open and machine-readable data. Now, the information is not only published on a level of metadata of to find easily a local council decision, but it is on a more granular level so that the information which is within the decisions can be easily harvested and feed base registry, for instance, which is now the fact for the base registry for the different mandates. And it can also be reused by anyone in the private sector. So this is the case for in nearby future for route planner, but it's already the case for apps that students are building within the context of the elections. We also have startups reusing the information to reuse it in back office applications. So machine readable information, which directly goes from the legislation to the back office applications. And last but not least, we're using it for participation of citizens. Now, the idea is that is once only. So when the information is published, it can be reused immediately by all kinds of applications without manual work. So it's not only about the reuse, but by using the principles of linked data and using templates, it raises the quality of the legislation, and by linking to other data, it's not only meaningful for the reusers, but it also raises the quality of the local legislation. And at this moment, we are taking next steps by using principles of informed policy. This means that we can do simulations about policy before ratifying the policy concept, which is called evidence-informed policy. So this is another example for the city of Mechelen, which can use the information in the policy about deviation immediately, both for citizens, businesses, and in their back office systems. Now, we put a lot of effort in ensuring that the ecosystem works. So we created an open source linked data decision editor. This was extremely important because it shows that the approach worked, and it can easily be embedded by existing service suppliers to local government, and it can easily exchange the data with suppliers and third parties. Second, So this is also at the top bottom was an example of harvesting of road signs. Now, second, we created an incentive for the suppliers. So it's about validating their data output to ensure that it's in line with the specification and to ensure that the data can be reused. And third, we support public and private parties. So we have a lot of support and training for the ecosystem to reuse the data, because if data gets reused more often, it raises the quality of the data. So this was a quick overview of the ecosystem. Let's do, oh, sorry, I missed the slide. On the next slide, yes. So at this moment, 56% of the local governments can already publish their decisions as linked open data. So the system is in place. It's an increase of 26% since last summer. So ecosystem is moving fast, and in a short time we will have the whole ecosystem in place where all local governments provide their data as machine readable legislation.
To show you how these actions work in practice, I will show you live our decision database. So local governments, they publish their local decisions on their website, and all we have to do is harvest the information because it is tagged with linked data. So I will show you live. Let's hope this works. How our database works now. You can see a lot of information. There's already 87,000 documents in here, and I can search on, for example, mondmaskers. It is mouth masks in English. It's a new kind of decision that emerged last year, and all of a sudden we see that 1,500 of decisions were made on mouth masks last year by local governments. And you can even click on some more information on the decision, and you can even go to the site of the city of Dann, where the decision is published. You can see here, this is the human readable version, but you can also go to the page source, and then you can see, and I will search on the European legislation identifier. We can identify this as a decision because we tag them with the specific identifiers that you use for these types of decisions. We know this is a decision, and we can even see which decision body passed the decision, what the title was, in which language, and so forth and so forth. So at this level, we now see the general concepts that are in every law or decision. And where we want to go from here is this. What we want to do is we want to harvest a lot of this information. We want to be able to see in which streets, for example, a specific law rules, like where do you have to wear a mask, a mouth mask? Nobody knows anymore. So you really need the data. And you should use the semantic web. You should have to be able to click on all of this information to maybe find all of the related decisions for this city in particular, everything that is related to mouth masks. And you should even be able to see how it's linked on how busy it is in that city, because mostly the rule is you have to wear a mouth mask when it's busy. So it would be kind of nice to see some kind of application that can be built on the linked legislation and the rules that are embedded in there. So we really want to make it possible to directly integrate the information that is published by, in this case, the local governments, to make sure that citizens know what rules they have to follow.
So what value do we deliver for the society? So as Veronique has explained, we have 300 local governments. They publish their legislation on their website. Now already the majority does. And this data can immediately be reused, not only for the authentic sources, providing better information and streamlining government processes, but also the reuse by the private sector and also for transparency by the citizens. So direct reuse of the information, but also in the other way around, by using the principles of linked data and those templates, we've seen that the quality of our legislation raised, and by linking to the other information, also the quality of information raised, because, and that was the title of our presentation, so information at your fingertips. There are those people who create the legislation. They have all the knowledge they need at their fingertips because of using the principles of linked data. I would like to thank you, and we're looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much. Indeed, there are a lot of questions. I'm afraid we will not have time to all of them, but we will make sure to get you in touch with the persons who asked. So maybe two questions. The first is, did you face specialized contexts where a specialized vocabulary would have been wished?
Can you repeat the question?
Did you face a specialized context where a specialized vocabulary would have been wished?
Well, as Veronique explained, we have like a base vocabulary for the local council decisions, but within the specific topics, like for instance, the road signs or the mandates, the public mandates, we have a more fine-grained vocabulary, so a more fine-grained extension, and there we reuse existing vocabularies, including vocabularies from the ISA Square program, the core vocabularies, and W3C.
Excellent, thank you. And another question, are you taking advantage of solid adoption in Belgium?
Veronique, are you taking this question, all right?
I think you know best.
Okay. So yes, we started experimenting with Solid, I think about 2 years ago. So it's now embedded within the resilience, COVID resilience program of the Flemish government. So we have many pilots, and we did in fact do a pilot within the context of legislation last summer, and Veronique can tell you all about this pilot.
Yes, what we did with Solid is actually in the case of elections, that candidates can render their expenses. They have to fill in forms now, and we would like that process to be digital, and it would have been interesting to see how a solid bot can help these candidates to gather the information of their expenses, and then just linking it to just putting it out there so the government can get out the data from the solid bot, so they don't have to re-enter it in a form. That's what we built last summer.
Okay. Very interesting, Veronica Raff. Thanks. I will.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. And now we will move on to the actual panel discussion. And John, Enrico, the floor is yours to present the panelists and any other comments that you might have.
Thanks, Enrico. Thank you very much also for the presentation, for the people who presented before. Now we have the possibility this afternoon to have 4 distinguished guests in our panel. In particular, we have Aldo Gangemi, who is a full professor at University of Bologna in Italy and the director of the Institute for Cognitive Sciences and Technologies of the Italian National Research Council. His main interests are in the ontology, open data, knowledge representation, knowledge extraction from text in general. We have also Victor Rodriguez Doncel of the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. Victor is also involved in a project about open data and knowledge representation, like the Lynx project that we have seen in the session before. And later we have also other 2 important panelists. John, do you want to present them?
Yeah, I will present them. I think I've been knowing them for a long time now. I think even become friends over the time. But just before presenting both economist colleagues, I just wanted to say thanks again to the 2 presentations we just had, and especially also to the Flemish one, which is really a very nice reuse of information. And I think sometimes I have the impression we have the lack of applications, the lack of the semantic technologies which is being used. Here I see it's done, it works, it's even getting better over time. So again, congrats to this, and of course I'm very happy that you implemented also ELI on top of it. So again, congrats. So let's move to Jean. Jean. Yes, I think he's one of the great experts over the time now. He has more, even if it doesn't look like it, he has more than 20 years of experience in semantic web and technologies, especially also in controlled vocabularies or ontologies. We call him in Luxembourg Mr. Ontology, and it also in knowledge graphs. He created, he's the co-founder and the CEO of a company, Montiel, which was one of the pioneers in the semantic web. Of course, Jean is not only active in legal ontologies, in legal graphs, he is a bit everywhere. And I think that's the interesting part, because he can really mix the knowledge of, would it be in culture, security, science, or with things coming out of the legal. He really tries to drive what we all in this panel do, to drive the knowledge-driven strategy, really the data-driven projects. And I think this is one of his big strengths. Of course, he's been part of the ELI task force since 2016, since the beginning. And he helped me create the Lux, the GeoLux ontology, which is my ontology for the official journal, and which now has been implemented, or let's put it the other way around, Switzerland has bought off the Casemate project, which is Luxembourg's project to publish their legislation. And I think this is maybe new, but still, Italy has also joined this endeavor. Mark, I am. Let's start by the end with Mark. Mark has rejoined the Office of Publications in October 2020. I think this was one of the good news of 2020. I think it's probably the only good news we had in 2020. So very happy. Mark has a degree in physics, doctorate in modern philosophy, and he is also an expert in the semantic web. He is one of the creators of the Cellar. I think we all know the Cellar, which is the repository of the content and metadata for the Office of Publications. So he's really also into this world of creating, and I think he was also one of my inspirers. He is also a member of the ELI task force, which he one of the co-founders, I would say, co-founders, if you want to name it this way. And before rejoining, he helped in Brussels to create a Discover EU, which are European News Portal, which you probably know, or European Solidarity Corps. So those are also things he has been trying to create over time. So I think this is, for me, a big introduction. I think I've never done such a long introduction.
Thank you. So now we can go for the exact questions that you're going to address to the panelists. And as for the timing, we are going to have this panel until 17:20. So please restrict your answers in more or less 4 or 5 minutes each. Sorry, we are going to keep the timing. Thank you.
So, Enrico, I think if you don't mind, Enrico, I will start with one question to Jean. Jean, we saw some of the benefits of semantic web, of linked data, etc. But what do you think? What is really the great benefit of a legal knowledge graph? What does it really bring?
Thanks a lot for the introduction. And thanks for this conference. I very much like the fact that now we have this word knowledge graph. It's something different than the linked open data, which is something about interoperability. But I think this word knowledge graph really is very clear for anyone when semantic web was not that clear. And so what we see with legislation, especially, for example, if you do legal analysis, so you start to really create links between legislation, and now we create lists at level of articles, So you say this article changes the article, this one side, this one repeat this one. And so you really see this web of links, this very complex network being created. And so it's kind of quite immediate to understand that when you create a complex network of legal resources, the best way to put it is to put it in somewhere that is able to represent a graph itself. So it's a lot more natural and a lot more easy to have it in a knowledge graph than any relational database. So that's really the fits between the technology and what you want to represent is absolutely perfect. The second thing is that knowledge graph, legislation, especially when you have the legislative analysis, is a very complex knowledge. It's very sophisticated and complex with 100,000 of objects and a million of links sometimes. I don't know what I wanted to say, but.
Jean, do you think that we all speak about the chatbots? We all think about our telephone. Hey, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Can you give me this legislation? Is there a need for knowledge graphs so that those machines can answer?
Yeah, that was my next one, exactly. Thanks a lot. The point is that if you imagine this knowledge graph, what is quite as a center of your system, as a data-centric system, where you really take care of the graph, you take care everything is perfect in it, it's very easy to connect it to any type of appliance applications. And so now also we have the JSON LD to serialize, so the JSON LD is quite fine for the developers. And so I will just give a few examples. For example, it was quite easy to connect Luxembourg knowledge graph to the European knowledge graph. And now those two applications talk to each other. The Luxembourg go to take information from the European knowledge graph and makes a lot of things automatic, which were manual. I can give another example that we just create websites. It's quite easy to connect website on knowledge graph, so it's what a lot of Orlex is like that. And we experimented with Luxembourg the fact to connect a chatbot, and it was also quite easy to connect a chatbot because we have the repository of knowledge, we have the way to understand complex, simple question can be complex queries in the knowledge graph. So we have also a lot now of experiments on reasoning with shackles. We can do reasoning on the knowledge graph for example, to validate that everything is perfect in the graph, that we don't have any mistakes in the legislation. So just to finalize, I think it's a perfect object to represent knowledge and to connect complex services on it. So it's really a beautiful technology. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Jean.
Thanks a lot, Jean.
Enrico.
Yes, thanks a lot, Jean. I think that you showed us very good arguments for implementing the semantic web in the legal domain. And a question to Aldo, in particular, according to your opinion, Aldo, what is the advantage of using controlled vocabularies in the legal domain? And what, in view of your expertise and your collaboration, for example, with the public administration in the early past, which are the best practices that you can share with us in the application of the semantic web in the legal domain, considering the application of standards and, for example, also the problem of knowledge acquisition bottleneck?
Okay, actually, you mentioned that a lot.
Yeah, too much.
Yeah, but okay, let's start from firstly, I should say that we're working with public administrations. There are really all sorts of scenarios. So there is not only one recipe. It depends a lot on what are their past practices. So there are people that are already involved a lot in normalizing vocabularies and creating glossaries, etc., and other contexts in which they completely outsource their data management. They don't actually know what is happening on that ground. Anyway, concerning controlled vocabularies, of course, they are relevant in order to import informal sources into the semantic linked data and knowledge graphs. What I could say, by the way, it's that it should be considered a sort of intermediate step because the real semantic is contained in relational structures. So with SCOS itself, you can do much more than creating these hierarchical taxonomies with a loose semantics, which are totally fine, but then it would be very nice to infuse some sort of relational thinking in those that develop these vocabularies. And one of the main problems is providing relational knowledge without obliging experts to learn all the logical structures that we are accustomed to work with. So this was a very, very old thinking. Already starting 30 years ago in working in medical informatics, it was already a bit like that. So they struggled for having sort of intermediate languages to facilitate this kind of relational thinking. I will tell something more about that. So I leave more room for expanding the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Aldo. John, do you want to proceed?
Yeah, I can have maybe a question to Mark. Mark, if I talk to my politics, my ministers, they say, well, all the legal data is there. I search on Google, I do a search on Linux, I do a search on Unix, I find the information there. So why do you want to implement the semantic web technologies? Why do you need this? Is there something more we can get out of this? What is, really in the legal domain, where can we really create something more beneficial?
Thanks, John, for this question and also for the introduction. Actually, the search engines themselves are a perfect case to start with, because long the search engines have joined forces with the idea of the global knowledge graph. And as you know very well, ELI is itself heavily involved in activities around schema.org to bring the legal knowledge into the standard search engine via semantic technologies, via schema.org adaptation. So it brings already for the citizen direct benefit, even in this use case. But of course, when we went in the publications office for semantic technologies, and as you know, the Cellar, our central repository, is RDF based natively, this was actually not our primary concern. Technically, the resource description framework, so RDF, gives a very simple way to express metadata and tools, and it allows us to link data easily, plus adding, as has been mentioned a few times, the ability to reason on it, to take data that is can be inferred from what is in there. This plus it's a perfect format to exchange data, to build this type of joint thinking, joint data between legal data and other legal data, let's say on the European or national level. Jean has already cited the case of European data and Lux, but also with Legifrance, there have been quite similar examples using the standardized query language Sparkle, but also bringing it together with other type of data that is not legal at all. This is, I think, was wonderfully demonstrated by Veronique and Raf in their example, where they bring together legal data and, for example, traffic data to create immense direct benefit that wouldn't be possible without having semantic technology as a mediator, and also ELI as one of the facilitators in this game. It's also an excellent basis for visualizations. You yourself have shown in your presentation earlier this morning examples of statistics. On EURLEX, we have now the ECB corner, European Central Bank corner, that uses some really innovative visualizations that are directly based on seller data. In the long term, this can even go further. I mean, we have had all the discussions around automatic compliance checking that also Enrico mentioned earlier today. These are certainly not for tomorrow, but we are today building the ground for this to happen at one stage. And even now, even today, Jean has spoken about bots. So the semantic data allows us to realize new forms of user interactions that wouldn't have been possible, or at least not easily, using language directly, using chat, using other forms. So there are a lot of direct applications where semantic technologies allow us today to justify their usage, or have many scenarios that actually wouldn't be possible without them.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks for your detailed insight in this matter. And it's something that I would like to ask also Victor to elaborate a bit more on what Mark has said related to the different use cases that we can consider in the legal domain for which the semantic technology can be beneficial. In particular, Victor, according to your experience, which kind of benefits we can foresee for different group of users, like professionals, legislators, and users in general, so citizens.
Yeah. Thank you, Enrico, for the question, and thanks to the organizers for being here. Most of the key ideas have been already provided by Mark and Aldo, but still I would like to elaborate a bit. From our experience, we have successfully used semantic web technologies in different use cases, improving information retrieval, labor law into collective agreements, or making better recommender systems. But these benefits were purely technical. I see with more enthusiasm other opportunities in other types of benefits, which are also challenging, can be risky. For example, transparency. We have also been involved in other projects where we have untangled corruption networks by having information as linked data. But beyond this, is the mere fact that we have that semantic web technologies are open, specifications are open, free. There is no need of large infrastructures to run the algorithms. So this creates opportunities for all, for small businesses to compete with the big monsters, and also to the citizens. And here is where my concern comes. Because I was hearing Fotios and Veronique and Raf, and I do not know if these benefits ultimately reach the citizen. So it is very clear to me that code will transform rulemaking in Greece and elsewhere. But currently, parliamentary debates can be followed by television and they can be understood by a majority. So will these deliberations will also reach the majority if put it in a machine-readable form? I hope they are, yeah, but
Thanks, Viktor. I might have a last question, maybe to all of you, and just make a sign as I do. I'm becoming more Italian, speak with my hands now. So, how do you think you can convince the deciders, your ministers, your company, your CEO or whatever, or you're in the university? How can you think and you convince them to move on to this legal knowledge graph domain? What do you think? Where can we convince them? How do you convince them? There's no moving there, so you have no ideas, or no? You raise your hand. Go for it.
Yeah, but I guess a very good way is to show what has been done, by Europe, by Luxembourg, by Switzerland, because we have now, which we didn't have before. Before we just had Mark, it was a little bit crazy to create a knowledge graph 10 years ago, so no one could believe it was possible. But now we have Switzerland, which are very serious people, who also use knowledge graph. So I guess just show what is existing, show also the cost of it, and show the flexibility. And so that's a very, very, and I think what did the Flemish government was completely incredible.
Yeah,
so just show the use case is just incredible. And
so you really think it's really by use case. Aldo, you didn't speak a lot before. Do you want to add something?
Yeah. No, I'm supposed to split my contribution into. That's why I stopped early. No, by the way, considering this question, I think it's pretty scattered. So you don't know in advance how to proceed in that way, because it depends a lot on your personal contacts and the practices that emerge in different institutions. So that there is not only one recipe. Of course, when you find some champions that want really to take advantage of these techniques, it's really great. For example, we had it in cultural heritage knowledge graphs in Italy. So we made this great project, but it was based on some decision making starting directly from the institution. So that they dedicated most of their efforts in doing that, and it worked very well. So, for example, a concept, if we can join up in showing all the success stories and try to promote them at the level of the individual governments, this for sure might make some route for doing more. I just had something because I didn't finish before, but there are also some natural ways of building on top of what exists already. For example, especially in all the legal knowledge in text, which is, by the way, the preferred one because most law is based on the authoritativeness of text. So a lot of that could be done just by extracting knowledge from there. And this can be done in multiple ways. No, so the problem is that nowadays there are approaches that are a bit too brittle, that do not produce the structured knowledge that legal experts would like to see. And on the other hand, there are these early AI efforts that are totally black box. So you don't really reuse things. No, they sell you a trained algorithm, a trained model that does everything, and you don't know why, and that is not the ideal. So, for example, hybridizing these techniques could be something that creates structure and solves problems that are not envisaging as of now. Victor, by the way, knows we started experimenting something with a with a PhD of his. We have not yet such results, but it was quite interesting because we tried to make to take inspiration from the structure of text themselves. So how to read a text of a legal text in the way a human would do. Okay, that would be quite nice to have in terms of AI technologies and using knowledge graphs.
Okay. Enrico, are you looking at the questions or the chat?
Exactly, yes. So I see that also Veronique and Fotis did some comments about your last question. So I don't know if Veronique or Fotis, do you want to...
Meaning that the ministers are totally excited about what they are doing. I think that's great news, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So we have 3 minutes remaining, so maybe we can wrap up, and thank you everyone for the contribution. John, Enrico, do you want to add the conclusions?
Shall I start, Enrico?
Sure.
Okay, let me try. I tried to put some what I heard about what I really like. Well, knowledge graph. I think John said it. It's easy to represent. It's easy to maybe interconnect, and I think also one of the main goals I found out of it was that once you have this database, this knowledge data, a website is just a window on this data. And I think that's becoming very easy nowadays doing this. We talk about adding information for the citizens. We talk about schema.org extension legislation to bring the citizen closer to legislation. Adding reasoning. I know we are still a bit at the starting point of this, but we are getting somewhere. Linking data, linking different silos, linking legal data with geographical data. I think that's becoming very important. We talked about visualizations. I think that also this kind of dashboards are becoming more and more important, whether it be for you or for the political. I think I can go on and on. Enrico.
From my point of view, John, I think that taking inspiration from maybe your last question about how to convince decision makers of the benefit of the semantic web, if I had to wrap up what our friends have just said, I think that we can sum up the discussion in terms of the fact that semantic web improve accessibility of legal text, improve transparency, the accountability of public administration, as Victor said, for example, stimulate competition between different actors, and also provides advanced services that either Jean, Aldo, and Mark has discussed about. So from this is actually what I would like to what I want to say in order to wrap up our discussion.
I think the timing was perfect. Huh?
It was perfect, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining this panel discussion and to contributing to the insights on semantic interoperability in the legal domain. Thank you.
Thanks to all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the panelists, and indeed, Enrico, what was your biggest takeaway from this panel? You moderated so well, putting all the questions to the others, but was there one thing that stood out particularly for you that you want people to take away?
Actually, we have seen very, very nice use cases of the practical implementation of semantic interoperability, and a lot of comments coming from the public and also from the panelists around these. So thank you very much again.
Well done indeed. That was our final session for today for ENDORSE. Of course, we will be continuing on tomorrow and on Friday, so don't miss that. Today we've seen quite a lot. We've heard so many different interesting. Right at the beginning, we had the keynote speech from Serena Villata looking at approaches to making ontologies for legal information, remembering that annotation can be a real headache. Practical applications and the huge policy effects in semantic tech wrapping up this evening, and as well as along the line finding out how to make the most out of taxonomy and thesaurus for improving findability, as well as talking about legal visualization. As I said, today our topic was all about about law as code. Tomorrow's theme is procurement and interoperability, so you won't want to miss that if you are looking at the procurement angles. I'm not sure whether we have any final thoughts coming to us via Slido. You've been all asked to put in your responses to those polls, so I will urge you to do that. We will leave that open for you so that we can gather thoughts, and we will join you again tomorrow afternoon. I hope you had an engaging afternoon and have a great evening.